Right, good morning everybody. I think everybody that's going to be taking part in this meeting is here already. So I'd just like to welcome you to this special meeting of all 4 select committees. What we're here to do today is to agree future areas for scrutiny for partnerships. So we're going to have a presentation sort of run in a kind of workshop style from Will, with different people participating. We've got Chris Edmonds here. I'd like to welcome Chris. He's the In One Place Programme Manager. We'll also have contributions from Julie Boothroyd, who you all know, and Will lead on the presentation. So what we're here to do today is to understand partnerships and to then agree future areas for scrutiny. So to, in effect, divvy up the partnership activity amongst the select committees for further scrutiny. Can I just remind everybody that this meeting is being live streamed, so please use your microphones by hitting the red button. That then will mean that the camera turns to you and it will pick up your questions. Please can we also turn off mobile phones? Councillor Eason?
Yeah, thank you. We're being live streamed, and for the number of members that are present, we're not doing a very good job for Monmouthshire County Council. We've got 4 select committees, 36 members. We can barely muster a couple of people. I express this view in other select committees. If we're going to pull a public image like this over, we may as well not bother.
This meeting has been organised since the middle of August, so it has been in the diary for some time. But I do understand that we've got a lot of select committees this week, and for that reason I think availability might be difficult for some members, but thank you for that. First item on the agenda today will be to elect a chairman. So please can I have nominations for a chair for today?
I would like to recommend Peter Farley as chairman, if he would like to be. Thank you.
Are there any other nominations for a chair today? No? Councillor Farley, would you be happy to assume the role?
With thanks to colleagues, I'm becoming rather used to this. Yes, I will. Well, thank you, everybody, and good morning. We have a new concept this morning. This is the Terracotta Army version of the Council on the table in front of us. For those who aren't here, there are an array of models, but many thanks to those of us who have come. Potentially, this will be quite an expansive session, as I understand. And so, as a sort of general preamble, I would ask colleagues to try and keep track as we go through of any particular areas that they will want to see, if I put in inverted commas, their committee pick up. Because at the end of the day, we can't do a full-blown scrutiny on everything this morning. It's really primarily an orientation exercise, an opportunity to learn about things. And I must confess there are a number of items coming up that I at least will not necessarily have come across before, and I think that's part of the point of the meeting. But we should aim to leave at the end with as clear an idea as possible, if you agree, of which areas we would want to earmark for particular committees for more detailed work going forward. Is everybody content with that sort of analysis? And on that basis, I'll try and, with Hazel's help and Will's, we'll try and get through the programme of information in order to make some initial decisions. Can we then go to the more formal part of proceedings? Are there any apologies to record, please, Richard?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Burrows, Clark, D. Edwards, Hobson, D. Jones, A. Wintle, Reverend James and A. Webb.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is declarations of interest. May I take it that with an agenda of this sort that you will be content with making a declaration as and when it arises, if necessary? And Richard, I expect you've got the wherewithal for members to make those declarations should they need to. Fine, thank you. So, substantive item then on the agenda to scrutinise the following. I'm going to ask Will McLean then to kick off and give us not only the overview of what we're looking at, but also perhaps some idea of who's going to be coming in and when to help us. Thank you, Will.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Chair, for your, I think, very succinct and appropriate introductory comments around the nature and the purpose of this morning's discussion. The scrutiny of the Local Service Board and the scrutiny of the partnership work that Monmouthshire is engaged in is absolutely fundamental to us being able to validate and evaluate the progress that we've made as a public service across the county. And it's a wide public service that ranges from ourselves in local government to Aneurin and Bevan to Gwent Police to the registered social landlords to Garvo to members of the community. So this is a very broad partnership which we'll come to discuss this morning. In the papers that were sent to you in advance of today's meeting, you will have noted that there was a map of some of the various different interventions which we're currently undertaking in terms of the partnership work across Monmouthshire. But there were also some links to some key documents that I hope will prove useful in terms of understanding the partnership landscape in which we're working in. The first was, of course, the Single Integrated Plan, which Council adopted last year. The second was the Unified Needs Assessment, which is absolutely fundamental to our understanding of need across Monmouthshire. And the third was a considerable piece of work undertaken to audit our partnerships and collaborations. That was done at the behest of the Audit Committee, but I think it proves a really kind of key set of documents for you to understand who we're involved with, how it's funded, and what the governance looks like. So I hope they've been useful. I think, as Hazel rightly pointed out at the outset, if we can take this in kind of broadly as a workshop style this morning, I'll talk a little bit about some of the background, the Single Integrated Plan itself, and what our priorities are at the moment in the LSB. But then I'm going to invite a range of colleagues to talk to you about specific partnership work which they're involved in. So Nikki Needle and Julie Boothroyd will talk around community coordination. Chris will talk around In One Place, which is a really exciting project funded by the Regional Collaboration Fund. Tracy will talk about the Integrated Youth Offer, and then I'll talk a little bit around some of the Families First work which we have, which is really considerable. It's a £750,000 grant programme, and it's the kind of the key anti-poverty funding stream that we receive from Welsh Government. So I'll just kind of kick on with the presentation. I'm more than happy to stop and take questions at any time. I am acutely aware that it is quite a long presentation, so I'll do my best to get through it as quickly as I can without kind of rushing over things. But if I do rush over something and you need clarification, please just stop me and I'll come back to it. So just run through most of this, I hope. I guess the key point just to draw your attention to is at the bottom end of the structure of this morning's meeting, really to talk around the SIP performance group, which is a new part of the infrastructure to ensure that accountability is absolutely clear. And then really importantly for you as scrutiny committee members to reflect a little bit on the Future Generations Bill, which is the bill which is currently going through Welsh Government, which will put the Local Service Board on a statutory footing, which will be different to how it's constituted currently. And I think that's probably something which we can just leave kind of some questions around as we conclude the session. So just to touch on the background, 2012, Welsh Government introduced some new guidance for local authorities. This was following a couple of authorities' kind of pathfinder work in merging their partnerships. That was the rationalisation between the Children and Young People's Partnership, Health, Social Care and Wellbeing and the Community Safety Partnerships. In Monmouthshire, that was a very easy decision for us because I think we all saw the value very early on of having an integrated local service board. We also at that time took the decision to streamline the LSB. It had grown, I think it would be fair to say, very large and really quite unwieldy in its membership, and to actually stop and say, okay, who do we really need around the table to effect significant change was obvious. So we kind of lost some of the broader membership and engaged them in some of the other parts of the partnership infrastructure, which I'll come on to talk about shortly. They're retained within the local service board some of the key statutory duties that had been previously manifested in the other partnerships. So particularly around CYP, there was a piece around extending entitlement and making sure that we met the rights of the child, the UN Convention. And there is an ongoing complication between a community safety partnership requirements, which are enshrined in Home Office legislation, and the aspiration to have a merged LSB, which is very much Welsh Government aspiration. So there is a tension there between Westminster and Cardiff, which we have worked through by having a separate group called Safer Monmouthshire. And the final one there is that we do have to discharge a duty to assess the sufficiency of play opportunities in Monmouthshire, and that again is done through the LSB on behalf of the partnership. The partnership structure which we use in Monmouthshire is probably a little bit different to some of the others around Wales. The local service board sits at the top of that and is really the strategic group. Membership consists of chief executives and the non-executive chair or leader of organisations. So on that sits our leader and chief executive, the acting chief executive and chair of the Aneurin Bevan, the chief constable and the police and crime commissioner. So you can see that's the type of level of people who attend the local service board. Interestingly, we also have Melin and Monmouthshire Housing Association as key members, which is hugely important to us. And we also have a community representative, Chris Edmondson, who sits on that board and kind of acts as that kind of test point for us, you know, when we're discussing things, that it resonates with the community and what the community issues are. Sat just beneath that, the programme board is made up of kind of director level, so chief officers within the council sit at the programme board level, and that's really kind of the doing, the day-to-day kind of management and oversight of the projects. Within that, there are three key groups. Engagement and participation, from previous discussions in this chamber, you know how important engagement and participation are for us. And that brings together all of the key lead officers from across the partnership organisations into one place to talk about what they're doing, how they're doing it, and so on. The Gwent Needs Assessment Group. Every 3 or 4 years, we are required to undertake a needs assessment, which is, in essence, at the starting point, a large-scale statistical analysis of the trends and the patterns within Monmouthshire itself. What became increasingly clear was that there was significant demands being placed keyly on Aneurin Bevan and on Gwent Police, having to report into 5 different local authorities. So we took our needs assessment group and made that into a Gwent needs assessment group. It works really well. I'm pleased to say Monmouthshire were the lead organisation in that development, and that has really helped us with our analytic capacity in terms of needs assessment. Beneath that then, there are 3 groups who focus on the different themes of the single integrated plan, which I'll come on to talk about very shortly. I think this slide just clarifies, I think, the relationship between those 3 key groups, the engagement and participation, Gwent Needs Assessment and SIP Performance Group. And that's really about understanding need, testing and clarifying that need, and then ensuring that the interventions you put in place to meet the need are actually working. So there's a key relationship between those 3 groups, and I think that's one of the differences that we have compared to some of the other local authorities in Wales. I think it's a more arguably a more sophisticated model, rather than just having kind of bespoke pieces of work that happen periodically. This is something which is ongoing. And I think that key part around testing what the statistics tell us is absolutely fundamental, because I think, as we've also rehearsed in this chamber previously, the statistics tell you one story about Monmouthshire, but it's very easy to find people who don't live out what the statistics tell us. And I think that engagement and participation is really important for that purpose. Move on just to the single integrated plan. At the heart of the single integrated plan, hopefully you'll remember, was a vision that was about sustainable and resilient communities. Increasingly important, particularly when we think about sustainable development across Wales. that our own communities are sustainable and they are resilient. Within that, we identified 3 key themes of activity: that nobody is left behind, people are confident, capable and involved, and our county thrives. And in those themes, we were really trying to ensure that this was properly integrated working, rather than just having the old partnership structures coming through and dominating a certain area. We were really trying to find things that actually spoke across the board and would have kind of outcomes which stretched across all of the different parts of our communities. And that was hugely important for us. So we can see, and we'll talk this afternoon about people being able to live their good lives. Chris, I suspect what Chris talks about will be resonant in people having access to appropriate and affordable housing. We'll talk about access and mobility, which is a huge challenge in terms of accessing services, particularly as we kind of go through this kind of financial contraction that we now know will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. We want to make sure that drug and alcohol misuse don't come to be blights on our communities. And what was interesting when we were doing the needs assessment was that areas where you think there might be very little drug and alcohol misuse, there was actually very significant drug and alcohol misuse. So, for instance, the northern part of Abergavenny has one of the highest rates of methadone use anywhere in Wales. So that's a real kind of key warning to us that we need to understand what some of the real challenges are in our communities. Families supported, this was about a much broader piece than just looking at young children and their parents. This was about thinking about families in the round, so thinking about needs when you have young children and your young parents, right the way through to kind of the needs at the other end of our lifetime, thinking about the pressures that will become increasingly apparent with the rise of things like early onset dementia and so on, working people having to care for parents. Those are the range of challenges that we really wanted to think about in that area. And people feeling safe, and that was one of the areas which I think led to some of the most heated debate as we tested out our kind of emerging findings, because the police information indicated quite clearly that levels of crime and antisocial behaviour were falling quite rapidly. But what we actually discovered very quickly was that people don't actually feel safe. And there was a real tension then between what people told us and what the statistics told us. Hence the importance of that needs assessment taking place then into the engagement and participation to get that qualitative sense about what it's like to live in Monmouthshire. And then the final theme, our county thrives. We wanted to look at business and enterprise, and the whole place sits in that area absolutely, spot on. That's a real kind of strong strategic alignment. We wanted to make sure that people had access to learning, but that learning takes place beyond what we would consider normally just as school age, and that we have kind of good opportunities for youth learning and we have good opportunities for adult learning, which takes people into the workforce. And obviously, Monmouthshire is a fantastic and beautiful rural county, and we wanted to make sure that we protected and enhanced the environment in which we all live. So those themes really held together for us and actually talked to something that we felt that Monmouthshire wanted to achieve. And it was something that I remember a long discussion here in council, but was unanimously adopted by council, and was absolutely unanimously adopted by all of our partners as well. So I think that's something to be proud of in terms of the common view of what the structure and what the future of Monmouthshire might look like. So the past year has been about implementing the single integrated plan, and it's been a year of developments, but that's not to say it's been a year without its challenges. There was a huge amount of work being undertaken. The cleansing of the partnerships, which I referred to very early on, might not have been quite as effective as one would have hoped. So we found out we still had a number of legacy partnerships in situ that were doing good work, but there was question marks around their accountability and how their reporting lines worked. And I think that's a key part of today's discussion. When you look through the documentation that we prepared for you, is for you to think as scrutiny members what it is that you want to understand more of, and which partnerships you want to have in front of you to question and to understand what they're doing, how effective they are, and what they're delivering. So we've seen a whole range of challenges for the team, and the team is led by Nicola Bowen, who gives her apologies. She's unwell at the moment, so she can't be with us today. But Nick has led the team through a great piece of work to really get a good sense of what that landscape looks like, but to really understand some of the tensions that exist between how people measure added value, how they think about shared outcomes between different organisations, and how we make sure everything we do actually does align back to the single integrated plan, which I just looked at. And it was really about making sense in that first year. That was the fundamental thing that we were actually trying to do. And in order to do that, we pulled together some priority areas of work for the local service board. And I'll just run through those priority areas very briefly now. So in terms of our key priorities and programmes of work, they fall into 4 broad areas. Vulnerable people and access to services, and we'll talk a little bit around community area coordination and in one place shortly. Clearly, how we support our young people to attain more in schools, but that's broader than schools. And one of the things which was our challenge right at the outset was to understand that things which come to the local service board, things we do in partnership, shouldn't be things which can be controlled by a single agency. And that's really important for the partnership to kind of have that in their minds. So schools are in essence not controlled, but largely influenced by the local authority. So school-based attainment is something that the local authority should be dealing with itself. I think the broader piece around how we engage people, how we make sure people stay in school, how we make sure people don't commit antisocial behaviour and want to work and learn is something that the partnership is there to support. And that's something which Tracy will talk a little bit about later on. As we move on, this key piece around anti-poverty, which is a really important area for us in Monmouthshire, was to focus in the first year at reducing the amount of low birth weight babies we have. Low birth weight babies are those which are born at full term, single baby, less than 2.5 kilograms. It's a key indicator for the future health and, I think broadly, arguably, success of that child. And it's absolutely kind of medically demonstrated that the key factors leading up to it are things like smoking during pregnancy and poor diet. So there are very clear attributable actions which are seen having a consequence in low birth weight babies. So we've really focused in on the area in North Abergavenny. North Abergavenny has a rate of low birth weight babies which is in excess of some of the poorest areas in the rest of Wales. So as a county, we have a very low rate, but that one specific area in North Abergavenny has a very, very high rate, which would be comparable to any of the South Wales valleys. And we really wanted to tackle that. So we're working with our colleagues in both Aneurin and Bevan and Public Health Wales to put in place smoking cessation schemes, better advice with new mums to actually look at how we can turn that around. And that's a key intervention for us. And then finally, alcohol reduction. Monmouthshire alcohol is a very interesting area of development, really, because we have higher levels of consumption of alcohol than anywhere else in Wales, but its impact on our health is lower than anywhere else in Wales. And there is a set of reasons for that in terms of people's diets and people's lifestyle choices offset the impact of the alcohol consumption. So in other places, you might see lower per head consumption of alcohol, but higher health impact. But whereas, so we need to work through that. So there's a key partnership led by the new Chief Inspector in Monmouthshire, Mick Moyles, and he's working through that piece of work. And I know that's something that previously Select has looked at, specifically the challenges around alcohol. And we're making sure we're taking through those key concerns from that piece of work and linking them through into the alcohol aspects of the Safer Monmouthshire Action Plan. Some of these aspects of rationale I will have touched on already. Vulnerable people and access to services, 22% of our population are over 65. The real pressure point for Monmouthshire is that we've got a significantly higher percentage of our population who are actually over 85. So the 65, actually for us, having just done Monmouthshire Engages, is a great strength, because there are people who are retired and really want to contribute to their communities and so on. Where our pinch point comes is that we have a far longer life expectancy than other areas, and with that comes greater requirements for social care and health later in life. We do have, I think it still surprises me when I see it, a 13-year differential in life expectancy between our most affluent and our poorest areas. And that's an incredible statistic when you think about it, that in Monmouthshire that we all know today, there is that level of differential. And that's one of the things which means we really need to think about how we support people into old age. Attainment, we need to close the gap, and I think this is something which has been, again, well rehearsed between those children who are in receipt of free school meals and the general cohort. Clearly, that's too big at the moment, and we do need to work very hard to close that. And again, that kind of inclusion work that Tracy's teams lead on is absolutely fundamental. I've talked about the low birth weight baby, so I won't repeat that. And again, this kind of the alcohol piece, the 46% middle-aged professionals drinking above recommended alcohol consumption, you know, 2 or more occasions a week is quite a stark figure, and that's something that we really need to think about. Although having read in the papers this week that the couple from Gogglebox seem to be kind of determining kind of social patterns and behaviours in Wales and Britain at the moment, that's something which kind of is, when we see that kind of pattern of behaviour, this is the type of thing which we're seeing reflected in some of these statistics. So we've reached the point now where we're going to begin having some of our partners in. So hopefully Julie and Nikki will be in shortly to talk around community coordination. And then we will hear about that and hear about the impact that that intervention's happening. And then I will pass over to Chris. Just while we wait for Nikki and Julie, are there any questions at this stage?
Councillor Powell.
Yes, you're talking about the high instance of alcohol, particularly in Abergavenny. I'm very concerned now to see that what was the Esso garage, it's now owned by somebody else, have now obtained a 24-hour licence to supply alcohol. Now, surely that isn't helping that problem. If people can access that 24 hours of the day, just go in there and get it. It, to me, doesn't seem right, and I don't know who did our licence department here give the licence, or was it done from higher up like Wales or something?
I'm not sure of the specifics of that case. I think the licensing decision would have been one which we made locally. The alcohol consumption isn't a problem that's peculiar to North Abergavenny or Abergavenny itself. It's right across, and it's a particular, the interesting thing is it's a particular group. It's that kind of professional grouping in terms of the analysis that are the ones who are demonstrating this higher level of consumption. So maybe it's just the stressful times that we live in, maybe it's kind of the lifestyle. But as I said, there is this kind of paradox, as it's described, which is that, in essence, that although we consume more, it has a lesser impact on our health than other places.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the younger people, but you say it's not such a problem with the younger, late teens, early 20s. You're thinking it's people older than that. Which is a bit of a surprise, really.
I've got quite a few members coming in. Councillor Eason, Councillor Penny Jones and Councillor Sarah Jones, please. Councillor Prosser, did I miss you?
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's to do with the low baby weight statistics in Abergavenny, which I am concerned about. What is the statistic for my ward where I've experienced some young mothers having low weight babies in a similar sort of circumstance that you're discussing?
I don't have that detail now, but that's certainly something we can come back to you with that detail, because we've got it broken down right across the county, so that's no problems at all. But when we look at kind of rolling out the interventions, we'll make sure that that practice is taken from one place and rolled out to all of our kind of areas, because many of them, the kind of the smoking cessation and the early interventions with health workers and midwives are things which can be replicated right across the piece.
I'm making an assumption that it's generally the social housing that has this problem. Am I right? And what, if so, what does Monmouthshire Housing, MHA particularly, do?
That area in North Abergavenny is characterised by the fact that it's a Monmouthshire Housing estate. MHA have been really pivotal in some of the work which we've been doing in establishing a kind of an outreach centre in that area, which is run by Abergavenny Community Enterprise Trust. So they've worked really hard with us around the community development aspect and the kind of the public health, working alongside them, offering opportunities for people to come in, to talk to people and so on, is pivotal to that. So MHA have been, throughout the LSB development, a kind of a very willing and appropriate partner.
Councillor Penny Jones.
Hello, thank you. I just wondered, what about the alcohol reduction, and you're saying it's related particularly to professionals. What does MCC intend to do about that, and how do they think they can do any better than the actual national government are doing? Are you talking in terms of support for public health or initiatives or what?
I think that's a fantastic question. I suspect that's kind of the area that we should think about how we scrutinise those interventions again. That's, again, not something which I'll have the detail on today. But I know that the Alcohol Action Group, who feed through into Safer Monmouthshire, it's one of their key areas of focus about how we do that. And of course, we'll be working with our colleagues in Public Health Wales to understand how we can most effectively tackle those challenges.
Councillor Sarah Jones and then Councillor John Prosser.
Yeah, and it's focusing again on the public health issue. I just wondered, in your opinion, how strong is our multi-agency approach, particularly with the voluntary sector, in terms of being able to deliver on some of the public health objectives? And what role you believe that the Third Sector Compact is playing in terms of trying to mitigate against some of those issues? It just brought it home to me yesterday. I chaired the domestic abuse group, and we had a number of agencies there like Women's Aid and Clymai, and it really is important for us to be able to direct the level of, you know, where our strategy is going in terms of the data and information that those third sector organisations are bringing to us. So it's really just to get your opinion on those sort of partnerships.
The third sector, we're very fortunate in that we have both the chair and the chief executive of Garvo sit on the LSB with us, and Emily, who's the deputy chief exec, is a key part of the programme board. I think that it's probably an opportune time now for us to look again at the charter that we have with the third sector and with community and town councils as well, and I think really refresh some of that broader partnership working aspect. With regards to the specifics of Garvo, I know they've been through a kind of a period of some organisational changes recently, but I think we work well with them, and I think it's an area which we probably will seek to develop in the future, because clearly, you know, again, due to the kind of, as we have to kind of contract some of the things which we do, we will inevitably look to work more closely with them to fill some of those gaps.
John Prosser.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to a specific case. I don't want to talk about a specific case, really, which was mentioned by a councillor earlier, and that is about the 24-hour alcohol serving in Abergavenny. It's my patch, actually. And I did raise concerns at the time after it was all authorised, because I didn't know anything about it. I did challenge officers, etc., and I can confirm that all the appropriate due process was undertaken, that it was done quite legally, quite properly, according to the existing law, right? But bringing common sense into the equation, I didn't know about the potential change. It was a variation of an existing sales license, if you like. And perhaps I should have been made aware. It was advertised. Unless I read that particular advert, I missed it. So I think this demonstrates here the use that scrutiny can have in future, that where like police authorities said, okay, that's fine as long as it's this and that, and it was all authorised. So there may be some mileage here to scrutinise other agencies to bring common sense into the equation. And, you know, whereas this was all legal and law-abiding, I hope it will resolve itself quite amicably on all quarters, because I do know that the retail sales in question are working very closely with the authorities and the police to resolve any problems, and I'm pleased with that. But I do see an opportunity here to influence the way people think, which is what it's all about. It's a single integrated plan, and in future I would possibly want to influence the decisions that are made so possibly training sessions, not only for us, but for other partners to the plan as well, to get the psyche in the right place. And I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prosser. Sounds a bit like the management of supply and demand to me. Councillor David Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to go back to the young children again, if I might. We've drawn comparisons in Abergavenny with other parts of Monmouthshire and South East Wales. That's a small pool, if you like, to fish in to get comparisons. Do we have comparisons with, say, the whole of Wales, similar areas, and indeed do we look across the borders? And could I just step from that one on as well, as far as the alcohol thing is concerned? With regard to petrol filling stations and convenience stores, the majority of them with their supplier have a policy, their supplier has a policy to ensure that the young don't get access to alcohol. The vast majority through Spar, Budgeons, whoever you like, Londis, they have proof of age required, and it's up to 25 years of age, so that it is really overkill. So the issue is with late night drinking, it is not going to be the young people, unless you get somebody older who is buying the alcohol and feeding it to the children, and that can be parental or, you know, other younger people but conform. So the problem with alcohol abuse from these sort of stores is actually, as you said, with the older people, semi-professional people, who buy a couple of bottles on the way home. It's very good business for the stores, but that is the case. It's the ones you would think are being more responsible. The issue isn't with young people. Young people get it served somehow, but they don't have the opportunity to buy it. Corner shops are terrible. They will sell to anybody, on the whole. Not a generalization, indication. Thanks.
I think just in terms of the comparison I made to the issues in North Abergwenny with the South Wales valleys was because it's interesting sometimes, because the nature of the statistics that we use to kind of compare areas, if we use kind of some of the disposable income, for instance, we'd never find ourselves comparing Monmouthshire with those South Wales Valleys areas. I think it's just the starkness that those are the most deprived areas in Wales, and our level of a key deprivation indicator is in excess of some of their levels. And I think that was the only reason I drew that out. We do have the figures right across Wales, and I think arguably we can go into England as well very easily, because I think the public health observatories allow you to do that. Interestingly, I think in terms of engaging our partners in the decisions that our organisations make, that's something which I suspect we'll see more of. So I suspect we'll see a greater discussion with the police around certain things. And I know, for instance, this might be a little contentious at the moment, but I know Public Health Wales have offered a view to the planning committee about the siting of a new McDonald's in Abergavenny, and they've offered a view professionally from a Public Health Wales perspective. So we are beginning to see kind of those kind of partner bodies having a view about the decisions that this organisation makes.
I've got two more people wanting to come in, and I think we should draw this particular segment to a close so we can go into some of the other detail with other contributors. So, David Hill and then Councillor Penny-Jones.
It was just a question really about the alcoholism and what are the statistics based on, because it seems to me to be quite a difficult area to really try and tell who's consuming what.
It's not alcoholism. I think that's really important. It's the number of people who are self-reporting that they drink more than the recommended amount at least twice a week. So it's people who are actually, you know, in survey work that Public Health Wales undertake, it's people actually saying, this is what I do. So that's the premise of that analysis. But it's not actually, we're not saying in any way that those people are alcoholics, just to be absolutely clear around that.
Penny-Jones.
Sorry, Chair. In fact, David Hill has cured the query that I had. The camera was not going off Councillor Jones and myself the whole time whenever anybody pressed the thing. I just thought with live streaming that people would want to see the speaker. And for the last few questions, it hasn't gone off us. But it did go to David, so I think it may be cured. Thank you.
Good, and particularly on such a sensitive subject. I always thought an alcoholic was someone who drank more than his doctor, and that was about the way it goes. Before we move on, could I ask a question, Will, please? I think you've shown us, albeit very briefly, how previous partnership working has become integrated into single integrated plan and so on. But I can't help observing, and it's reflected in some of the questions that have been asked, health and well-being is very much hidden in all of this, and I wonder why that is so. There are all sorts of elements to health and well-being and health protection that I would have expected to see somewhere in this, but it's largely hidden or non-existent as I see it.
I hope that health and wellbeing isn't hidden at all. I think clearly where we see things such as supporting people to live their good life, that's writ large through that area. Supporting families, key aspects of that is around people having kind of a strong and good start to life, which is fundamental there. The drug and alcohol misuse is health and wellbeing. And it was something which, when we concluded the drafting of the single integrated plan, I think our recognition of things such as 5 Ways to Wellbeing, which is the NHS's kind of strategy for developing good wellbeing across your life, was recognised in the single integrated plan, and that was particularly praised by Aneurin Bevan and by Public Health Wales. So I think in the detail and the body of it, that is captured, and apologies if I've glossed over it this morning.
Thank you. Can we then, would you take us into the next bits of the presentation? It looks as though we've got a team all ready to go.
Okay, so we're going to move on to community coordination now, which is one of the key partnership projects that is being led by Julie and by Nikki from within MCC. It's also got a large partnership-based leadership group who have led the development and delivery of the project. So I will hand over to Julie and to Nikki now.
Morning, everyone. Oh, got electric shock. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. My name's Julie Boothroyd. I'm the Head of Adult Services for those people who don't know me. And this is Nikki Needle, who's our Changing Practice, Changing Lives Coordinator. Very pleased to be here today. Certainly the Adult Select members will have heard some of this before, but in the context of the wider integration and partnerships agenda, I think there's some very interesting points that we want to cover. We've entitled this Transforming Adult Social Care and Health because it is wider than just the community coordination aspect of our journey. And in terms of a context, I'm just going to run over a couple of slides in the beginning to sort of give you that wider context. As you can see, that over the next 15 years, and this is well known now, that the number of people aged 85 plus certainly in our county, are going to double. And while this is happening, there is a big increase in complexity and a big increase in that demographic pressure. And it's fair to say that we're feeling that now. What we've recognised is a traditional approach to that, and this is a few years ago we recognised this, that a traditional approach to continuing delivering the services that we've delivered will not actually it won't work for the future, certainly financially. And actually we've come to a position where we've recognised that actually supporting people in the way that we have supported people has created a lot of dependency, and that hasn't actually assisted people's health and well-being in the way that we wanted to. We've put up there that a traditional social care package, and this is today, as an average across all the people that we're supporting, is £9,175 a year. That's an average figure across the people that we're supporting. We're projecting that we would need an extra £25 million to deliver the same service as was to more and more people. This is a prediction that we expect that we would have to invest in if we stayed still and continued doing what we're doing now. As a sort of another figure that we've popped in there is the sort of cost. There's a very, very close relationship between social care and health, and we hear lots of information about delayed transfers of care and the cost that hospital costs in terms of delivering support to people. A non-elective hospital stay costing over £2,500 for a sort of average length of stay of somebody in the NHS is also a significant issue for us. The other point that I'd want to raise, because we have something called eligibility criteria, and currently in Monmouthshire, our eligibility criteria for people who use services and have access to our services is set at moderate and above. So it's moderate, substantial and critical. The number of people assessed as having a critical or substantial risk to their independence in Monmouthshire has increased from 70% to 90% in over 4 years. And I think that's quite an important figure. So 90% of the people that we are supporting at the moment fall into that critical and substantial risk to their independence area. Penny? Yeah.
Councillor Jones.
Sorry, what does that mean in terms of numbers? I mean, it could be 1, 2, 100. So could that be clarified a little bit, please?
Yeah, of the 2,000 plus people, 90% of those people fall into that category. So that's that figure shifts, but we use 2,000 as a sort of figure at any one time. Okay. Yeah. So that is a bit of a backdrop, a bit of context around where we are in terms of demographic pressure and some of the money. We are rising to that challenge, and over the last 3 or 4 years we've been looking very, very hard at our system and looking at how we need to deliver differently and transforming the whole way in which we deliver support to adults and older people in Monmouthshire. And very much through that systems lens, we've looked at helping people to live their own lives. We are part of helping to help people live their own lives, but we're not the whole solution. And we've been looking at this piece around community coordination and small local enterprise to support us on that journey. And Nikki will talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, we've adopted these approaches to try and do the number of things that are on the slide, which is to divert individuals from statutory services. That's not to say we're stopping people coming in, but we're looking to say, well, who does need that level of support and at that level of cost? Supporting individuals at risk of becoming dependent on services by developing their local networks, developing the support structures and support systems that they may have around themselves, and actually putting some intensive support into people to look at how they can support themselves instead of just falling into the social services arena. Supporting people already in receipt of statutory services to reduce that dependence. So again, that's another big area of our work. We're looking to re-able and enable people to have that intensive support when needed, but then to reduce from that, whereas in the past, that might have stayed in for 10 or 15 years. That isn't the pattern of how we deliver services these days. Trying to give people a real choice and control so that actually they support themselves, have all the information that they need, which best enables them to look after themselves. People have lived a life and actually trying to capitalise on that. Supporting people to stay strong, safe and connected. That word connection is very important in terms of people whose perhaps, whose health is failing, who become more withdrawn. Actually, how can we use our support to ensure that people remain connected? It's a very important feature of what we do. And that links to the nurturing relationships and actually reducing loneliness and isolation. These are very, very important strands of work for us. Looking at developing mutually inclusive communities. There's lots of work going on in lots of communities where we're actually looking at, particularly around people with dementia, how can we ensure that people are continued to be supported and not just shut away. And establishing personal, flexible and accountable opportunities for support. That's a two-way process. So actually that accountability is we can support, but actually we're going to facilitate and assist people to develop their own support as well. I'll pass you over to Nikki.
So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an update about our journey so far in terms of getting community coordination and small local enterprises up and running. I'm hopeful that many of you will remember that the majority of last year we actually looked at particular proven methodologies that were helping people to stay strong and well and living their own lives within communities. And we found two particular proven approaches that were working. One was called local area coordination, that we renamed community coordination because there was a confusion with LAC in terms of looked after children, and we didn't want to make that continued confusion in terms of the working practice. And the other was around micro-enterprise, or developing small local enterprise, so people have more choice and control if they need care and support about what that care and support looks like and who delivers that, and then taking a part in actually owning that, the development and the running of that. So we were fortunate to be supported by Nesta through the Creative Council's work that they were doing with us. And we developed the approaches and a business case and an evaluation and learning framework around implementing the approaches. And Cabinet approved the business case in October 2013, so just a year ago now. After that, we went out into the two areas that the business case proposed that we start this work. That was Caldicot and Abergavenny. And we held two very wide community engagement events. And we were very pleased with the outcome. We had about 80 people come along in Caldicot and just over 100 in Abergavenny. And we were telling them about what the approaches were and how we wanted the community to get involved. We didn't just want to graft something onto communities that, as Julie said, already has a lot of asset and strength. We wanted to actually engage communities in getting behind us in developing these approaches. Then we went out to advert because we wanted to appoint some very special people to the roles of community coordinators and the small local enterprise person. And that took us a while, and we deliberately actually went out to a second advert for the Caldicot and the small local enterprise appointments, because we wanted to make sure we had the right people to start off this work with us. We appointed Ashley Morgan to be our coordinator in Abergavenny, who started on the 1st of April. And Heidi Ingle-Gillis started it was actually the 9th of June in Caldicot, and Sarah Wachowski started as our small local enterprise coordinator on the 9th of June as well. And to date, they've actually been out and about, and they've created connections with, it says over 100, that's a pretty conservative estimate really. They've been out and about, and they've made themselves known in communities, with everybody that's in there from a voluntary third sector, but equally the people that live in Abergavenny and Caldicot, they've made themselves known to those people through just walking about really. We've asked, as we said before, we have created behind this, because obviously there is an investment in making this work. We've got a learning and evaluation framework where we charge Ashley, Heidi and Sarah with keeping an ongoing narrative of how things are working and how they're not working, what they're learning and what they would tell other people if other people came to them and said, if you were going to start with community coordination or small local enterprise, you know, what advice would you give? And we've literally just cut and pasted their comments into this presentation, so it's their voice and their experiences that actually is here. So what's working from the community coordination perspective is actually getting out and talking to people in communities. And that's not in the traditional spaces that we would ordinarily go, our council properties. They're getting out and about in coffee shops and in marketplaces and just engaging anyone that's around and having conversations around what is it like to live in this place, what's good about it, what's not so good about it, where are the gaps, where do you think we need to put our energy in supporting people, vulnerable people, that's, you know, across the whole range of age spectrum, to live better lives and to be able to contribute to the life of this particular community. What's great about their roles is they actually, you can't just, as Ashley said, you can't just sit on a chair and have that conversation with somebody. It takes time to get to know people, for people to be able to trust you enough to tell you as it is really, and that's what they're learning, which is working really well. Being able to go back a second and a third time and have the ongoing conversation. The other good bit about their particular roles is that, as we've said, we don't want to reinvent the wheel here, and we're not here to replace anything that's already there. We're here to connect and support people to what's already out there. So if there are third sector volunteering opportunities, it's about getting to know what's there and connecting people to that, rather than saying we're here and we're going to reinvent the wheel and do everything for communities. So it's linking individuals to existing community resources, helping people to volunteer and to do particular things that they want to get involved in, connecting people together to create their own small networks, because we want these approaches to be ones that are self-sustaining and resilient. So we're not grafting, we're not taking another service and albeit putting it in a different place. We're wanting through these methods to actually get people to start talking to one another, so at some point we can walk away and leave strong and resilient communities and move on to another place. Engaging with voluntary sector and third sector organisations has been particularly good. There's a wealth of that, particularly in the north of the county, and making best use of all those resources that they bring to the table has been a really good thing. In terms of small local enterprise, Sarah's done some fantastic work in identifying these small enterprises that already exist across Monmouthshire, and She's got about 21 that she's working with at the moment, who she's bringing together to form an association. Did you want to? The chair.
Sorry, Tony.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm trying to read the...
Well, I'm sorry, I had to move from there to you because I couldn't read either. I remember the consultation you had in Caldecott Leisure Centre 18 months ago, was it? There was a level of criticism from other groups that are out there, voluntary groups, church groups, that they say they're doing this work now. Okay, you are where you are. How do you link these groups together, which was the concern, you know, are they just going to off in different directions? How are you going to pull them together? Yeah. And equally, where is the elected members in this process? Because I know you've got this one in Caldecott. I wouldn't know who he or she is. Yeah. I wouldn't know how you search, locate individuals who need support. So how do you link the local member? How do you link the community groups which are already there together?
It's a very good point. I mean, part of it is actually about walking the streets. It's about charging Heidi with the responsibility of getting out into Caldecott and finding out the information that is already out there in terms of what churches, what groups exist, and actually pulling that together so that it makes sense for people. There's a Gavo directory, there's yourselves, as I said, as elected members. So it's about actually finding that and bringing it together in a place. And we had a meeting yesterday, a small local enterprise meeting, where we were actually saying, where is the best place to store that information and link people to? Because there's a number of directories and resources and those sorts of things. And we're actually starting to look at how to do that and set up particular opportunities for actually bringing all of that together. And I think also, as I say, we're reporting here back through joint scrutiny to the LSB. It's about bringing the leadership group who actually come together and represent various organisations to say, you've got a wealth of this information. We're coming from a county council perspective. There's our police colleagues, there's our third sector Gavo colleagues. How do we collectively, as a group of people, make sense of that and get that out there so it makes sense to individuals? It's a one-stop shop, really.
Can I just add to that as well, just in relation to, I think it's a really valid point, and it's one that we're uncovering all the time, which is, yes, there is lots of stuff out there, but actually we've not been using it. And when you look at the context that we're operating in from a social care and health point of view, people have traditionally come and knocked on our door. And a lot of those people don't need to knock on our door. When they do knock on our door, we're very helpful, and we've sucked them in over many years, and people have become quite dependent. Having the community coordinators allows us to get much more of that intelligence and assist us to navigate people towards what is already existing. This isn't about replacement, as Nikki said. It's about coordinating an approach so that the people who would normally have been coming to us are strengthened by being in their communities and accessing the church group, etc., etc. And plus the fact she only started in June, so you know it's quite early days at the moment. But it is very much an agenda around our bit of the business in terms of saying how can we do preventative work with people rather than bring them into costly council services. I hope that helps.
Forgive the cynic in me, but there's a tendency of some members to feel that they're being left behind, they're being overtaken by events around them and don't become drawn into these things. In other words, the local member is being in some respects ignored. This is a feeling from quite a few members out in the field that initiatives are being put forward which really are bypassing the local member. I hope this isn't one of them.
Just out of interest, Councillor Eason, were you at when the business case was presented? Did you have sight of the business case? In
Caldecott?
No, for the business case for the community coordination for Caldecott and Abergavenny.
No, I wasn't there. No, on that one, no.
Because it obviously was it was well aired in that context. I think for me, Heidi, we will give some feedback to say, go and hunt Tony down and have a little chat with him about what's going on in Caldecott, because that would be useful.
Thank you. I've got two more people have signalled questions, and I'd like to just call a bit of a halt and make an observation before we move on. So Councillor White and then Councillor Powell, please.
Thank you. My ward is Overmonnow in Monmouth, well known to social services. I'm very proud of the help we get, not just from yourselves, not just from the county, not just from Aneurin Bevan, but from the people like you've described in the streets who want to help, banded together, and I have to mention Monmouthshire Housing because they do a wonderful job, and I will declare an interest on that. Also, we have a band of volunteers that go out and befriend, based in Drybridge House. I'll declare an interest on that one as well. And the Mothers' Union at my church have been wonderful in helping the homeless people in the hostel just down the street from the church. This has been going on for a long, long time, and I'm very proud of all three. They do a darn good job. I've had to introduce the Mothers' Union to the council because council didn't know what they were doing and how they were doing it, and that's been a big, good introduction because they both now are singing from the same hymn sheet, excuse the pun, and they will do all they can to help these people who find themselves in Monmouth and before they are transferred to somewhere else. When you come to Monmouth, as you will, because I've got one of the deprived areas, I'm sure we can all work together on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor White. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just in answer to what Councillor Easton said. We were lucky Ashley Morgan came and made himself known to the councillors in Abergavenny, so we are aware of what he's doing, and he's, you know, who he is and all that. I'm sorry that Councillor Easton missed out on that.
Thank you. I can't help but thinking Councillor Easton has made a very important point, but it will vary in its applicability across the piece. I know there are others who want to join in, but I really think we need to get back into the helicopter. We're going into far too much detail. There's, what, another 49 of these to go through? We're never going to do it. I may exaggerate slightly, but in order to make the point, I think we really need, with the help of colleagues, and thank you very much for that input there, very much appreciated. We really need to stay in the helicopter, otherwise we will be overwhelmed by all the stuff on the ground. The presentations that you're seeing on the screen, if you've got good enough eyesight, will be circulated afterwards, and I understand, and they contain a wealth of detailed information which will no doubt recur when individual items get scrutinised in the different committees.
Can we just carry on?
Yeah. Just.
How do I? Does somebody need to turn their light off? Oh, there we go.
There we go. Okay. One of the things that Sarah has been doing is, as I said, there's about 21 small local enterprises across Monmouthshire at the moment. She's bringing those people together into an association called Little Enterprises Make Big Differences. And she's basically bringing those together to offer peer support and mentoring to one another. So again, it's just a way of actually, you know, kind of knitting and weaving the fabric of the good stuff that's going on in our local communities. And she's also looking at identifying any service gaps in the market and thinking about how do we create small enterprises that actually help people to purchase their own or get involved in delivering their own care and support. These are quotes from Sarah and Ash and Heidi, just basically just to just give you an overarching kind of feeling of what it's like for them in the very early days of actually rolling out the approaches. Some of the work I'm doing is quick, some is slow, and that's fine as long as it's a person-by-person approach. And that's really important for us because if you're having a what matters conversation with an individual, it will take you into a very different space, a different place from perhaps the next person and the next person. So we make no apologies for that because it is about individually working with people to make their lives as good as they can be. To be an effective community coordinator, it's essential to embed yourself in the fabric of the community and to understand how it lives. Abergavenny and Caldicott are very different places and they'll require very different responses, and that's what we've charged our coordinators to find out about. And also use all available resources. Don't think this is a one-person job. Keep on track with facilitating and resist all efforts to fix things. We're there to help people develop the resilience and the sustainability to live good lives and not to go in and fix, which is where we were in the traditional model. This is just going to give you a tiny example of one of the things that that can give you an idea of what's happening. Any of you here from Mega may well know that just at this moment in time, the Budgeons, the one store that there is in Mega, the Budgeon store, is being reconverted into Spa, and that's going to take a period of about a month. And Mega has quite a large population of older people who wouldn't necessarily be able to go out of the village to go and get their provisions and their shopping. So Sarah got to hear about this and thought this can't happen. We can't just close down the one store that there is in the village. Got in touch with the Building Bridges project, which is a project that supports young people in Monmouth, and spoke to Fred, who's a coordinator there, who said this can't happen. So Fred searched about and found a vacant premises in Mega, which was the old fishing shop, I think, the old angling shop, and two volunteers from the project who wanted to get involved, and set about purchasing some dry provisions that would last about a month. So, so here they are in the shop. Yeah, next one on. So these are people from the one project who are actually now open for the month, so that people who ordinarily would have gone into the village to get their provisions can still do so. So this is just an example of a lady buying her shopping. There she is again. There's the pop-up shop. Next one. And there we go. So it's Building Bridges emergency shop now selling papers. And just a quote from that lady there. Basically she said, "You're lifesavers, what would we have done without you?" And that's just an example really of how quick and easy it can be to get into communities and just pull the resource that's already available to us together to make things happen at a very simple level. So I just thought that would be useful for you to see as an example.
Okay, so just to finish off really, something about what's the impact been so far. We've obviously explained that it's quite early days, but that actually are impacts and we're already beginning to see some of those. Just in terms of, I hope you can see this, because it is a bit green, yes. Can you see it or not? No, okay. So I'm going to tell you about it then, and then we'll pass it round. But in effect, what we've done is we've spread over the last, well, since 2011, 2012 to date, we looked at the number of older people receiving a traditional long-term community-based package of support in social care and health. That's a figure that in our world is beginning to decline. And why that's important is that's the number of people who are supported to live at home. So in 2011-12, we were supporting 1,263 people to live at home. This doesn't include people that we're supporting in other forms of provision. And that's dropped so far this year to 1,137. Now, actually, that's a good thing, because actually we're supporting people to remain at home, and actually we're supporting less people. And the impact of this project is beginning to bite, in that we're trying to, as we said earlier, prevent people from coming in and, in a sense, supporting people in the place they live and with the support networks around them. The number of people who are being supported by a community coordinator so far is 43. So since April and June, respectively, there are 43 people who are actively being individually supported through that approach. And there are 2 community coordinators in post and 1 small local enterprise person. So there are 3 people in that bit. And from a small local enterprise point of view, Nikki has already mentioned that there are 21 up and running small local enterprises that Sarah is involved in supporting. Close to happening, these are her words, 9. And at an idea stage, 7 further ones. So in a very short period of time, she's been in post since June, she's been able to sort of make some, I would argue, quite a sizable impact there. And the final impact here is one of cost avoidance. The business case was very, very much based on Cabinet agreeing to some investment to pilot this approach for 2 years, on the basis that we were going to avoid the cost that I've been talking about this morning. So far, both at the end of last year and into this year, £27,000-ish last year, the real figures are there, and this year so far, £68,380 has been cost avoided, and that equates to last year about 8 people being supported through that figure, and this year around 20 people have been cost avoided into our system. So early days, but we're already beginning to feel that impact that we need to obviously build on further. And I think that's it. That's it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Julie and Nikki.
Okay, so the second of the kind of the specific projects we're going to look at is going to be In One Place. In One Place is a project that's undertaken between local government, an Iron Bevan Health Board and the housing associations in Monmouthshire. This came about almost certainly by a conversation that we had at the Monmouthshire LSB. We had that at that meeting, Mark Gardner, who's the Chief Exec of Mellin Homes, and at that meeting we were discussing the opportunities that were arising from the Regional Collaboration Fund, which was a £10 million investment pot held by Welsh Government. We saw the benefits of In One Place, we bid for that money, and I think we received in excess of 600,000, I think. 550. 550. Inflating a little bit. But this is a project that's funded by Welsh Government and actually undertaken by colleagues within Monmouthshire and other parts of Gwent. So I'll leave Chris to talk to you about this.
Hi, good morning. There's only 3 or 4 slides. One is just give me an opportunity to explain what In One Place is about, and then we've got some ongoing evaluation process. We've got a research partner that's working with us to analyse and evaluate what the partnership is trying to do. And then there's a slide which highlights just some of the projects that we're undertaking at the moment. So it's a very concise presentation which picks on the highlights. And obviously, if there's any questions, do let me know. In One Place is a new model of public service collaboration. It's a unique collaboration. We've not found any evidence for anywhere else in the UK where the configuration of the partnership is as we have it here, which is health, social care and housing. The collaboration consists of 14 partners, and therein is an issue and a problem that as a programme manager, have to try and manage. It's an Iron Bevan Health Board, the 5 local authorities that make up Gwent, and 8 housing associations. As Will said, we've funded for a 3-year programme from the Intermediate Care Fund, and that the funding, it refers to the posts, myself, and I'd have 2 colleagues, and the funding for the research programme as well. So there's no actual funding that goes into the collaboration itself. The collaboration is about utilising the money and funds that we currently use in a more effective way. As I said, the ongoing evaluation is from Miller Research, who are a local research organisation, and they've had an ongoing process that's engaged with our collaboration since the very start. And some of the initial headline findings that they have, which are highlights really the difficulties and issues we have around 14 very different organisations trying to work collaboratively. We identified that we needed some early successes, and that's part of the programmes that we're working on at the moment, and people felt that was essential. But one thing that we hadn't factored in was the amount of time it takes to get some of these early successes, and the interaction of all the different organisations, the different components within those organisations, all trying to have a contribution, but sometimes those contributions can be quite conflicting. A common understanding of the network members, it's about an Iron Bevan Health Board, the NHS staff understanding what housing associations do and vice versa, and then linking in the various departments of local authorities as well. It's about understanding the engagement between housing strategy departments and social services departments, and that isn't consistent across the 5 boroughs. The different departments and systems work in different ways. So in many ways, it's more than 14 partners in a way. Perception that In One Place would increase workloads, but it's actually trying to decrease workloads and actually make the work that we do more effective. Variations in understanding of what the issues are, that role of housing, how important it is to be a fundamental aspect of people's health and well-being. Lots of the talks and information that we've had this morning is all underpinned by people having a safe, secure home, whether that's their own home or a tenancy. And that's the platform that people can use to actually improve their health, their well-being and lifestyles, and gain opportunities for employment, education and so on. You can't do those sorts of things if you have a poor quality home or an unstable home, or in fact are homeless. Some people have seen it as it's a programme that's led for the benefit of the Health Board, simply because the Health Board actually is hosting my post and the 2 other posts. And it isn't about that at all. It's about opportunities for each of the partner organisations to develop and work in collaborative ways. The size can make it unwieldy, and that is an issue. It is a big issue. One of the elements that we have is a professional network, which is made up of 2 representatives from each of the organisations, which meet on a monthly basis to discuss projects and issues. But obviously that's an enormous meeting. It's very difficult to get people to make their contributions there. Some people will speak, some people won't. And it can get very one-sided if somebody's more vocal than another. So that's an issue that we have to try and manage. It's about making the best use of resources in a challenging financial climate. It's about trying to get messages across to some practitioners, particularly in health, who are community nurses and so on, to actually recognise the financial position that we're in and the idea that we've got to try and use that money more effectively for better outcomes for service users. And it is an individual responsibility rather than a corporate one. We've got to get that message across. It's not my problem, it's the manager or the chief executive. It's everybody's issue, and we've got to try and make an influence the way that we work and change our working patterns. Bringing health, social care and housing practitioners together. It's quite a long history of social services and health working together, but housing hasn't been an integral part of that. And as I say, it's a fundamental building block of that relationship, so it needs to be there. And it's understanding how we can work together. Encouraging collaboration and explore opportunities for regional working. This collaboration has not been tried anywhere before. We haven't got a blueprint to run on. We haven't got something to copy. So we're finding our way as we go along. But it's also about identifying what opportunities that collaboration presents rather than individual members thinking that there's going to be presentations of opportunities. It's about people looking at what the collaboration offers their organisation and seeing, is this an opportunity that we can take advantage of? Is this going to help us in what we do? Rather than something being imposed or offered to them. It's about working together. And raise awareness of the work done outside of In One Place. So it's about trying to identify where we fit into the system. Our current projects, we've only been sort of up and running really since the end of March. We've got 20 work streams that have been considered through the In One Place programme, placed throughout Gwent. I have got a long list, which I haven't put onto a slide, of various projects, of various housing projects right across the whole borough of Monmouthshire and the 4 adjacent local authorities as well. Some of the projects have been deferred for the local authority housing decisions. It's only interesting when you actually start to get into the detail of a particular project that people then realise what's involved, the consequences that, or whether or not that's going to have an impact on the local community, or whether it's going to be an impact on local services, who's going to be paying. And once you start making those proposals, some people find these issues a bit contentious. So we've had to revise some of the plans and learn how we actually take them forward. So we're learning all the time. But there's a whole range of processes there. Refurbishing existing stock is an option, and looking at building new buildings. And another aspect is accessing an extensive Aneurin-Bevan estate. Aneurin-Bevan, as with most of the NHS organisations, have a vast estate of buildings and land. And it's about looking at what opportunities they present as well into whether or not we can actually utilise that land in a much more effective way than its current use. The other side of this is something that we hadn't planned, is about education. And what we've discovered is lots of teams, whether that's in local authorities or social services teams or in Aneurin-Bevan Health Board, don't understand the housing register system and the allocations processes that you have. And it's very interesting that lots of people who have a caseload, whether that's a social worker or a community psychiatric nurse, the people that are on the caseload aren't on the housing register. They don't often think about housing options for people. And what we found is very often, certainly from a health perspective, the default position is always a residential placement. And it's massively expensive. A typical placement will be £140,000 a year. Very often those placements are made because there's no alternative being sought, and one of the alternatives is looking at local housing options. So what we've got to be able to do is get practitioners to actually tailor their practice so that option is considered, and the way to do that is through the housing registers. The complicating factor is, as I perhaps alluded to, is that the 5 boroughs have different registers and different systems. So it's about understanding locally what you need to do. And so that's another aspect of the work that we're taking forward. And that's the slides I put together. Try to keep it as brief as possible. There is an awful lot more to that, but obviously questions, happy to take.
Thank you very much, Chris. Questions from members? Councillor White.
I hope I'm not jumping out of the helicopter. You did mention district nurses earlier on, and you did say that they will have to be made aware of funding. I'm sorry, they've got such a specialised job. They do such a wonderful job. How are you going to pile more responsibility on them?
It isn't about more responsibility, it's about recognising where they fit into the system, the impact that, whether that's community psychiatric nurses or any community staff or any ward-based staff really, the message is that there's a reducing amount of funding and that the work that they do has an impact on the use of that funding. And it's about trying to just, for them to picture where they are in the system. And I think it's about accessing housing, this particular programme.
Yep, and then I think
I know. I'm sorry.
Next,
I'm sorry. An Aaron Bevan
Yes.
owning buildings and land.
Yes.
I'd love to know how much, because they're always saying they've got no money.
Councillor Easton, then Councillor Prosser.
I'm somewhat confused as to what your function really is and what the emphasis on the role you've got. You mentioned 5 local authorities, 8 housing associations, etc., an Iron Bevan Health Board. I'm not quite sure where you're coming from in the whole scheme of things. But equally, as an additional question, do you ever involve the Community Health Council, which is key to the public or the patient's rights in the future, or now in the future?
We've not.
I'm a bit lost, to be quite honest. What you're doing?
All right. What my role is to coordinate that collaboration. The various partner organisations decided that they could work together more collaboratively in a structured way. So we would link health, social care and housing together in a coordinated fashion. My job is to try and bring those partners together and facilitate and take forward the ideas that collaboration generates. So what we've been able to do is identify housing developments, and then we're trying to link those to individuals. Currently, our focus is on continuing healthcare patients who are currently out of county in expensive residential placements, and looking to be able to bring those people back so they can have their own home and have the support they need in their own home. But that needs a level of coordination between all the agencies involved.
So where are you based and who are you responsible to?
I'm based in an Iron Bevan Health Board,
right.
And I'm responsible to the 14 organisations through the programme board, which is made up of a representative from the Health Board, a representative from one of the local authorities, and one from one of the housing associations involved.
Right, what about the Community Health Council then?
The Community Health Council we've not engaged with directly, no.
Why not? Just...
No, it's the Community Health Council. I'm certainly aware of the Community Health Councils, but at the current position we're looking at is to provide homes for people rather than the impact on the health. So I'm not quite sure what role you see the Community Health Council making.
To fit in my mind where you really coming from. I got some drift of it, but it seemed such a wide remit with lots of people. I wasn't quite sure what it's all about, but it's okay, right?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. And no doubt that will be the foundation for some more detailed inquiries by some committee or other, because that's the issue. Councillor Prosser, then Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, the assets management part I was very interested in. That's another area where possible scrutiny committees can have a good look at, and the proper use of buildings, because we're doing it in Monmouthshire County Council as well, and it all fits into the magnificent plan. So I think there's a lot of scrutiny in that area. On the back of my colleagues' comments, really, I had an email crying for help last night from somebody who's having problems with a particular housing association. asking me, can I help in any way? So I think to myself, right, how am I going to help? And I think, well, who am I going to ring? So today I'm going to be on a chase, if you like, to try and find out who I need to alert to the facts that are happening. And it involved a disabled person as well. And it comes across to me that I have difficulty in identifying that contact point. So I was wondering if you can guide me to a particular contact point which can look at all issues. Because we're talking about this collaborative working. Is there a contact number or point, or do I email you, or do I just have to keep searching for the appropriate authority?
I mean, it depends on the nature of the issue. But if it's to do with a particular housing association, the way to contact them directly, or to contact somebody who's in the allocations department of Monmouthshire Council. And if contacting the housing association is an issue in itself, it's the allocations process and the housing strategy team here that would manage the sort of direct relationship between the local authority and that housing association. That would be my advice.
Thank you. Councillor David Dovey, then I'm going to hand back to our helicopter pilot.
Thank you, Chairman. John has asked one question. The question I was going to ask, but there is another one that went through my mind, and that is the role of an Aneurin Bevan within this organisation. I'm pleased that you work for the Aneurin Bevan group, but experience of an Aneurin Bevan in my ward and amongst my councillors and my own personal experience is less than satisfactory, and this has been going on for many years. Bearing in mind what appears to be your track record, what is it that you're going to bring that is really positive to this this organisation? Because people in my ward and in Chepstow, I suspect, really question how effective an Aneurin Bevan is in their traditional role. And in here, I rather wonder about what they're going to contribute towards this organisation. Is that?
Yeah. I think that the key to it is their, as you referred to, their traditional role, and I think this is an attempt at supporting an Aneurin Bevan to work in a much more proactive way, in a much more supportive way, rather than the traditional sort of paternalistic way that an Aneurin Bevan will try and do everything. It has to recognise that it can't do everything. It can only achieve its goals by working in collaboration with local authorities and social services departments in particular, and the role of housing. And that's been something that hasn't been recognised. And essentially what we've talked about, the whole concept came around from a forum, a conference that took place about 4 or 5 years ago, which was a health, housing and social care conference. And from that conference, a forum was established, chaired by the Chief Executive of the Health Board. And that meets on a quarterly basis. And one of the very first meetings there was a description of 4 youngsters who were coming through transition. They were 16, 17, moving on to being 18 with learning difficulties, and their traditional trajectory would be an out-of-county specialist placement. And one of the housing associations, Monmouthshire Housing Association as it happens, the Chief Executive there said, well, if you told us about these youngsters 2 years ago, we could have built a solution for you locally. And that's what In One Place is trying to do. And it's trying to drag the Health Board along with it. When we put forward these suggestions around people having housing instead of a residential placement, it's quite an alien concept. And when you speak to the nurses and the people involved in that, they'll describe a house as a mini hospital. So that we've got a cultural issue that we have to address as well. So that's part of my role. It's about the education side of things. It isn't just about housing registers, but it's get people to think in a different way, in a much more collaborative way, and a proactive way.
All right. Take a tip from me. If you want to find out what the Health Board's up to, go into Gloucestershire and find out there. It's much easier. Yeah. Councillor White.
Is Smith on the back row, Chairman? I think. Yes. You made reference to a very large body for your meeting. Oh, we're not working. It's all right, I'll shout. You have a very large committee covering 5 authorities. You made reference to the fact that many people seem to be reluctant, or numbers of individuals on that committee are reluctant to contribute. Why is that? Do they not see the value of what you're doing? And how are you going to improve that situation? And just to satisfy my mind, over the 3 years, how much will the funding total towards the one in one place? I understand it costs us nothing financially as an authority or the other bodies. So what is the total funding? But concerned that you should have a committee that doesn't sound as if it's functioning as it should. Thank you.
That is a significant issue around how our committee works. And what we've tried to do is address the various departments that are represented there. My own personal feeling is that some officers there are not at the right level that should be there. They tend to be there because they were sent rather than they volunteered or wanted to be there. So we've had an ongoing programme where we're going around all the various departments, encouraging people to recognise the importance and the opportunity that In One Place offers, and to make sure people are there. So we're looking at how we can restructure the committee through its chairmanship and the format, and individual engagement as well. I spend a lot of time going out talking to the individual representatives and trying to encourage them to participate more and to recognise the potential of the collaboration. Some people will come not knowing why they're there, in all honesty, and that's part and parcel of how collaboration works in that initial instance. And one of the comments about it's going to add to my workload is because they don't understand its purpose. But we're very early days, and we've got an ongoing process with our research partners about some workshops that we've been running to try and get people to engage more and to raise issues that prevent them from contributing, and to address that. So it's something we're very conscious of and working very hard to address. And you mentioned about the budget. I think the total budget for the 3 years is about 550,000 from the Welsh Government.
Thank you. Okay, so we're already re-establishing questions for further and future scrutiny. I mean, the whole business of how partnerships work, how they can be scrutinised, how various elements can be helped to play their part, which is exactly what this work is all about, very much at the heart of scrutiny, and I suspect will be even more so going forward. So thank you for those questions, and thank you, Chris, for having a go at some answers which were not necessarily entirely for you to answer, but are at the heart of what you're doing in this project. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to hand back to Flight Lieutenant McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I think just before we move on to Tracy talking about the integrated youth offer, just one point. I know that we've had several discussions which have been concerned with your frustrations. I don't think that's too strong a word, in terms of some of the practice within Aneurin Bevan and how you're able to scrutinise and to understand what's happening. We have had a discussion with the chair of Aneurin Bevan, David Jenkins, who offered two things. The first thing was that he would be more than happy to come to full council and offer some observations as to the challenges facing Aneurin Bevan at the moment, which one might say, despite the addition of significant funds, remain exceptionally challenging at the moment for the Health Board. But he's also offered that he would be prepared to undertake a shared scrutiny session, not dissimilar to this, to be questioned about the ongoing workings of Aneurin Bevan. And I think that's probably an offer which we'll look to take up at some future date. I'm going to introduce now to Tracy Thomas. Tracy is our Head of Youth Services. As I mentioned earlier, this is all about how we wrap around our young people to make sure that they kind of get the most out of their lives and that they can really kind of contribute, engage with their communities and achieve all that they want to. So I'll pass you over to Tracy now.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see many of you again. Okay, I'm going to take you through Whistle Stop tour of the Integrated Youth Offer. I've only got 3 slides, but I have got a bit more to talk about to them as well. So, and obviously, any questions, please ask me as we go through. So, what is... Oh, which key am I using?
This is right or left.
See, different laptops, there's different keys. So, what is the Integrated Youth Offer? It is the statutory group for youth support services, and we have the key in fulfilling the statutory responsibility on behalf of the LSB with all youth support services offered in Monmouthshire. It was established in May 2013, as many as you know, with the Children and Young People Select Committee, and endorsed by Cabinet July last year. The Integrated Youth Offer is a shared framework for youth support services, delivering all services to 11 to 25-year-olds in Monmouthshire, excluding education, because obviously they're in school between 9 and 3:30, but we do additional support with those as well. The group is made up of 32 youth support service representatives from statutory, voluntary, third sector and private sector, which I really welcome and I'm very pleased to see. We have a very well attended group every quarter when we meet, on average with at least 75% of members turning up to meetings. We have 7 subgroups who meet in between the 4 quarterly meetings, because obviously it's a lot of business to be done in one quarter. So the 7 subgroups that we've actually got are the Youth and Community Development Group, and they facilitate the development and sustainability of a wide range of positive activities which will be attractive to young people in their social time outside of school. And it also supports their personal and social development. We've then got the Targeted Youth Support Group, which actually, with other partners, looks at those more vulnerable and challenging young people and tries to get us earlier intervention and preventative work with them to make sure that we have better outcomes for them and the communities in which they live. Volunteering subgroup, that is promoting volunteering opportunities for not just young people, but for community members as well. We're all very aware at the moment of the financial climate many groups are finding themselves in, and particularly within some of the youth support service groups. So we've managed to sustain some of those through our volunteering group by recruiting volunteers. Partnership and Commissioning Group looks at providing open access and areas of deprivation and areas of need, working with others in positive change for young people, including the most vulnerable. That group is working with businesses and communities and actually looking at how we can actually bring in money that can be best well spent with the projects we provide for young people. Information Advice and Guidance Group, sorry, I'm starting to get a cold come in, I can hear my voice going already. Information Advice and Guidance subgroup makes sure that all young people have access to the relevant information to them in all mediums, whether that be social media, website or hard copies, in libraries, dentists, doctor surgeries, youth centres and any other buildings we know young people access. The Improved Employment and Learning Opportunities subgroup looks at employability and reducing those young people that are deemed to need to cross the authority. Thank you so much, Councillor. Thank you. And then finally, the Young People's Voice subgroup, which to me is one of the most intrinsic parts of the whole purpose of having youth support services. Without ensuring that young people have a voice and actually have relevance to the services that we're providing to them, there isn't much point in us actually delivering what we do. So that is one of our key groups, and I'm sure many of you are aware of Engage to Change, that is the Council's Youth Forum as well, that is now linked into all the voluntary and other statutory youth forum groups and also the schools councils. So we've actually got a nice tiering format working now to make sure that all ideas are fed up to yourselves and back down to young people through the relevant groups. I've hidden the laptop now on my papers. Okay, if I put them all up, it's easier to talk to them then. Progress and achievements to date then. We've set a shared vision for youth support services across Monmouthshire, and that is to coordinate all services and resources of all partners to ensure that they are used effectively to deliver youth support services to young people in Monmouthshire. We've set overarching outcomes for all agencies to work towards, we're very conscious that all of us were working towards different outcomes for young people. So we agreed on 4, which was, first one's young people maximise their potential. Second one, that young people manage their emotions and relationships effectively. Third one, that young people have access to effective support. And the fourth one, that young people are consulted to and listened about issues that affect them. We did have a 5th column of equality and diversity, but then agreed as a group that actually they should be intrinsically linked within all 4 of those other outcomes that we've advised on. We've reduced duplication of services after a greater understanding of services available. The first objective we carried out 12 months ago was actually to complete the comprehensive mapping of youth support services, which you'll see a couple of points down. That enabled us to see how much duplication was actually going on amongst all services that were available to young people. That isn't happening as much now. We haven't eradicated all of it yet, but we are working towards it. This enabled direct links to partners to a quicker response time to dealing with young people in crisis. That everybody who sits around the Youth Offer group has said the networking is the most invaluable part of it for them, and they now know who to go to if they've got a young person in need. Whereas before we would have to send in several referral forms before a young person would have access to the right service. So that has actually stopped and enabled us to work with more young people quickly. We've collectively worked with 11,082 young people between the ages of 11 to 25 in the year 13-14. You'll note there is an asterisk next to 11,082. The reason being is we haven't actually managed to find one single system yet where we are dealing with individual young people. Some of the services we are very mindful of that we've double counted. Not many, it won't be less than 10,500, but we're trying to find a way where we don't double count young people. We also carried out a roadshow during Youth Work Week this year in 2014 where we had stands and the Choices bus in every one of the main towns, including Usk, where we actually had all service providers there talking to communities and finding out what was important to them. We had 3 boards. One was what we already offer in each of the communities. What did people want to see in their communities, and what gaps could people actually identify as well? That's provided us some really rich narrative data now that's going to feed our plan for next year to be able to make sure we deliver on these services that people want in their communities. Sorry, there's one more. We also support the Monmouthshire County Council volunteering pledge, and through doing that we've actually managed to recruit 16 volunteers so far that I'm pleased to say have actually gone on to support some scout groups across Monmouthshire who are desperate because I know they have huge waiting lists. So through supporting that, and it was actually as a result of the roadshows we've done, some public members signed up as volunteers, so we've been able to help out with another voluntary youth group. So our future work programme. We've commissioned a transport review with partners to look at how we can make more activities accessible to young people after school. I'm very mindful that this is already being undertaken within education and the employment and skills group for Monmouthshire, but we're specifically looking at all the partners within the youth support services who have access to or own different varying modes of transport that either aren't being used during the daytime or all shut up at night time, and we want to make sure we can access those for young people to get, in particularly those in rural areas, back into main towns where the predominant activities are being held. We are currently working on a digital map that we're going to working with SRS on, in actually being able for people to go online and pinpoint activities in their communities. So where the local scout group is, where the next taekwondo group is, where the football group is, where the youth centre is, so people can actually go online. We know there's lots of directors around, but they're actually out of date usually as soon as they've got printed. So if we had an online one that we could update more regularly, people will be able to access that. And we're also talking with a company at the moment on having an app created, because obviously we're very mindful that young people use social media and all have iPhones, so they can download an app. So if they're stood in the middle of Usk, they can work out what facilities are in Usk for them. We want to maximise services to young people through collaboration and shared service delivery. We're already currently looking at with some of our partners on how we can actually embrace partnership working now rather than us both delivering on the same project. We've got to agree our 2014-15 priorities to support intelligence for the single integrated plan, and we're actually meeting next Wednesday to actually set those priorities. That will come from all the narrative that we had from the roadshow. And also the subgroups to continually ensure the young people are receiving services and evaluating and challenging the work of the Youth Offer Group. The one thing that the subgroups are very good at doing is challenging one another and scrutinising one another's work in a very positive way to make sure that we are still on top of our workload. We're not duplicating work to young people. And if anything else new happens, well, let's go and work in that direction rather than actually doing the same old that we've always done. I think that's it. Thank you. Is there any questions?
David Hill.
I was wondering whether you, for my knowledge anyway, you could indicate a bit, you know, what these young people are being supported for. I mean, you've got a fairly large number of young people being supported there over an age range of sort of 11 to 25. And so, you know, what sort of part of the age range are you really looking at, and what are you actually kind of supporting them for?
Okay.
Yeah.
We're actually, thank you. We're looking at we work with all age ranges, specifically all partners are from agencies that do cover that full age range spectrum. If you predominantly look at the 11 to 17-year-olds, that tends to be your more traditional youth work, youth centre kind of activities that you would think they would go to. We've then got 6 post-16 projects that are currently working with those young people, making sure they're engaged in employment training and education. So we do cover up to the full 25. When we're looking at 20 to 25 as well, the majority of the volunteers that we use within other groups, so they were some of the volunteers that we managed to secure for Scouts. So it's encouraging young people in all age ranges that they can work together. Just to give you some idea of some of the work that we've actually done over the last year and some of the impact, obviously the volunteers was a real positive. The NEAT figures for Monmouthshire are down to 2.8% now. It's the lowest we've ever been as a result of one of the subgroups we're working with. That only equates to 26 young people in Monmouthshire, but that's still 26 we don't want. And we're working towards making sure we reduce that even more by next year. All 11-year pupils who are working with alternative education programmes this year have all achieved their 5 level 1 qualifications, which is the first year that's ever happened as well, through collaboration of partners, making sure that these young people had the intensive support. We've also had 16 young people go through bereavement weekend. We're one of the only authorities in Wales that actually offers that, because we've got the luxury of having some of those key partners in who've got that specialist areas to be able to offer that for young people. There is a full report that did go out to children and young people scrutiny, so I can certainly get that sent round to all of you if it would help to have a bit more of an idea of the work that we're actually currently doing.
Councillor Smith.
That's right, Chairman. No, it's all right.
Have you got problems with your microphone? Is that?
Yes.
Ah, right.
Doesn't want to talk to me, Chairman. It's all right, doesn't matter. I may have missed this, I'm sorry. Do you work in conjunction with Coleg Gwent as well? How close is the working with the college?
Yeah, Coleg Gwent sits on the employability subgroup. They're one of our key players, along with all the training providers, Torfaen Training, Learnabout, and some other FE colleges actually that have interest from England, because they know that students are looking to be, Coleg Gwent are a very key partner within that subgroup for us.
Can I ask something? Do they make any actual provision? They're an integral part of your group, you're talking, but is there any actual physical provision for support for youngsters from the college?
We can certainly, yes, we provide a counselling service within the college through the group, our group, or are you asking if the college makes a contribution? We can signpost young people to the college for courses. They make us very aware of what is actually going on. We link closely with the 14 to 19 network as well, which obviously Coleg Gwent is a key performer within that.
Thank you.
Councillor Penny-Jones.
Just to follow on from that, did you say you provide the counsellors for the Coleg Gwent? And if so, do they buy into that provision?
Right. They don't buy into it because we actually receive a grant from Welsh Government, which is specifically, it was called the Schools-Based Counselling Money. It's now the Integrated Schools Counselling Service. Sorry, schools has been taken out specifically to look at integrating with further education colleges because they've widened the age range up to 19 now, and also making sure that we offer in doctor surgeries and other areas where young people traditionally wouldn't want to access a counsellor in school.
Sorry, can I ask supplementary? Is that on a part-time basis then? Because when I worked for Coleg Gwent, we had full-time counsellors. So obviously that's not the case anymore, and you provide part-time care.
We certainly do. It's half a day a week.
Thank you. It's actually gratifying to hear some of this today, because remembering it from Children and Young People's Committee a while ago when things were at a much more formative stage. I've got one question before you move us on, and it's unfair to ask you this question. It's a question for everybody, but it's prompted by the many good things you've said. What do you do in a partnership, and you've got large numbers? What do you do if one of them isn't delivering and falls short? What actually do you do? Are you just nice to them, or is there some way you can be a bit firmer than that?
Would you like a response? Because I have an example where we have had difficulty with one of our key partners actually regularly attending, and I actually brought that to the Children and Young People Scrutiny, and you wrote a letter for me, and that assisted. They did attend for 2 more meetings, and then they've subsided again. So we will be coming back to ask, but also going to the LSB as well, because there's another way now of reporting directly and making sure that partner's a key partner back around the table.
And I think we can guess which partner it was, and it's one we've already been talking about. But we'll come and that's really the point, isn't it? We can look at the way projects and collaborations work, and that's great. And thank you very much, Tracy. That really was very clear and helpful, and indeed encouraging. But we've also got to think hard, haven't we, about how we engage with some individual key partners, some of whom are in quite a number of these projects in various ways. And we're beginning to learn that, I think it's fair to say, but we've got some way to go. Councillor Prosser.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind people of a certain thing from, I didn't want to interrupt the Speaker, on the United Bevan Health Board. There were comments about interaction. We do have a Community Health Council representatives, councillors who attend that council, who are a channel, and that's the watchdog for patients. And I'm also a member of the Stakeholders Reference Group, which looked at policy that is presented to us. I give the sort of the accent from the local authority in that sense. But I'm always available for comments to be passed to me, which I can ensure go through the right channels. So we do have representation. I just wanted to remind councillors of that. We're not just adrift in the sea. We do have councillors' representation.
That's very helpful, and we've covered a number of those bases this morning. Thank you very much for that. That's a very pertinent.
Could I just add as well, on live streaming today, we were advised we're live streaming. The screen is not following the speaker. So if anyone's watching out there, we are here.
Okay, thank you. And I think we're definitely kind of moving into the kind of the home straight now, hopefully this morning. I will be very brief as I take you through the Families First programme. I'll dwell a little bit on Joint Assessment Families Framework. I think that will be something which Children and Young People's Committee will be very interested in. It's clearly something which has a huge potential to mitigate increased social care costs, but also to really make sure that we look at the family as a whole as opposed to the individual. But let me just take you through Families First. It is the Welsh Government's flagship anti-poverty programme. It is at the heart of their child poverty strategy, and it's got 3 different parts to it: Flying Start, Communities First, and the Integrated Family Support Service. Now, clearly, we do not receive any funding at all for Communities First in Monmouthshire. we have areas of deprivation which are sufficiently deprived, but we don't have the number of people living in those areas, not even stretched across the whole county to reach the thresholds Welsh Government had defined, which is problematic for us because many of Welsh Government's subsequent funding decisions are reliant upon that being your first gateway question. So will this funding be available? Depends entirely on whether you have communities first in your area. So it is problematic for us. But this is really around a family-centred approach to actually supporting young people and their parents to have the best start in life, and that's absolutely fundamental. In terms of how we've undertaken this in Monmouthshire, we have recently looked at a substantive restructuring and recommissioning of all of our work within Families First. It is a substantial grant to us. It's worth approximately 750,000, although that, as in all funding, is under pressure. But we've really sought to make sure that the work we're doing is absolutely fundamentally aligned to the work that the Single Integrated Plan and the Unified Needs Assessment identified. So we've recommissioned some work, we've commissioned some new work, and we've decommissioned work. And that actual kind of really robust process of looking at what's working, what's aligned, what's effective, was absolutely fundamental to that. So we launched in April 2014 the new programme. At the heart of that is the Joint Assessment Family Framework and the team around the family. These are multi-agency approaches that look to address a whole range of complex needs that exist in single family settings. We've also got sat around that a range of different things, the ACORN project, which is based in North Abergavenny, Watch, Wait and Wonder, which is a 0 to 3 intervention for very young children. We've got school, home, family support, we've got counselling, all of the things you'd expect to see. We've brought through and we've provided extra funds for to make sure that they can extend their provision right across the whole of the county. One of the things which is also noted within Families First is that there is a specific element of funding available for those children with disability. So we've looked in there to include inclusive preschool play, play and leisure, and an inclusive centre up at the ACORN Centre, which really kind of brings those children with disabilities into mainstream, inclusive and early intervention work, which is fundamental to their kind of future success. So I said I'd be brief. I will talk a little bit about the Joint Assessment Family Framework because it is fundamental to Families First. There is lots of words up on this slide, so I won't go through this line by line, as I'll make sure that all members receive a copy of this presentation. At the heart of it is the family either being referred or asking or making their own self-referral. And we have had some self-referrals within Monmouthshire, but the family is at the heart of it. And we look at that from a range of different perspectives. There will be a social care perspective, there's often a police perspective, an education perspective, the third sector. And they look at the needs of that family, and they look at that stage, some of the symptoms of what has happened to the family. So if there are particular issues with perhaps children in school, misbehaving, playing truant, all those type of things, they will act as the trigger for a referral to JAF. And those panels then come together and look at the challenges that are facing that child, and they'll bring all the intelligence that they have about the family. If it's determined that it is a multi-agency requirement, and if it's determined that those are not child protection issues, so there's a very clear understanding of the threshold when something is a JAF issue and when something is child protection, they will then take that case on. And they take that case on into something called the team around the family approach. And that's when we bring in together multiple agencies to try and remedy the challenges that that family is facing. And in the past, that's involved the police, that's involved the housing associations, it's involved mental health, and it's really interesting to look at the breadth of challenges that some families face and the fact that it's only really a multi-agency approach that will actually really kind of rectify that matter. Well, that's slightly erroneously placed, so let me just skip on. But in essence, the JAF is really fundamental to us maintaining early intervention and supports. That's the fundamental parts of what the JAF's about. We're also hugely fortunate in that we've recruited an excellent JAF coordinator. Her name's Kirsten. She came from Torvine. She's a fully qualified social worker. She's absolutely aware of the challenges that exist around the threshold for child protection and non-child protection, and she's working really closely with our child protection colleagues to make sure that's fully understood and that JAF is used effectively for what it's meant for, which is early intervention work, to stop those families moving into crisis, and that's the fundamental part. I talked a little bit earlier about aligning the programme. One of the things which has happened is that Welsh Government have looked again at the programme of work and what they're trying to achieve. So when you receive this presentation, you will see that there are a number of outcomes Welsh Government is looking for, and you can see here how we align the work that we do to those. So I hope very much that Children and Young Peoples will come back to look at the JAF and look at its successful implementation, and will come back to look at Families First. And I think in that sense, understanding the strategic alignment will be fundamental to that. I'm going to push on now, if with members' agreement, to think about some of the accountability that sits around the single integrated plan and sits around the LSB itself. This will be partly about an emerging infrastructure in Monmouthshire and partly about an emerging requirement at a national level. So I'll try and keep this as light as I can, because some of it can get a little bit heavy. So we have brought into existence something called the Single Integrated Plan Performance Group. And it's really about us addressing the challenges I alluded to right at the beginning about how do you map and capture the impact of a range of different partnership interventions. So it's about making sense of those complexities, it's about reviewing the existence of groups and their governance arrangements, and it's about making sure that they have clear and effective action plans in whatever form they need to be. And it's about us really making sure that we're capturing their performance and we're actually challenging them as to the progress they've made. Now, one thing I'll say here, which links into the comments I'll make around the national expectations coming about as the Wellbeing and Future Generations Bill, is that we have what I would call as a very, very high quality but quite small local service board support team. So Nicola is the strategic performance manager, and Sharon Lloyd, who sat at the back, is our LSB development manager. With a little bit of administrative help, that is the sum total of the officer resource that we have to support the LSB work. If you were to wander into one of our neighbouring authorities, you would find 5, maybe 6 times as many officers doing the same role. So for us, it's about proportionality and it's about balance, and that's really important. So one of the key design principles behind the SIP Performance Group is that it actually brings the chairs of the different groups together and uses them to hold each other to account. So there's a sense of peer accountability, and I think that's really important. And my comment then around the resource that we have wouldn't at any stage compromise our statutory duties, and I want to assure you of that. Our Single Integrated Plan Performance Work Programme is looking at all of these different partnership groups to really question what they do, to question the quality of their action plans, to make sure they're capturing the outcomes that they're having in an effective way and really holding them to account for delivery. And I think this is, you know, if we can think a little bit amongst select committees and the SIP Performance Group about how we can align the timelines of these reviews, that would be excellent. So we can really get to grips on what's happening from a select and from a peer scrutiny perspective as well. These are just a couple of demonstrative slides just to kind of pick up when things are happening and what are the key outcomes that we're looking for those sessions. This is just, again, more detail around what kind of recommendations. So we've had the youth offer group have been to the SIP Performance Group. There it was questions, are your terms of reference resilient enough? Are they clear enough? We picked up on their action plan. How does that work through? Is that effective? And we also picked up on the kind of support they need to be effective as a group. So again, this is, I think, a good example of how well the type of structure that we've got in place can work as we go forward now. So the final section for today certainly is about the future. The overview of this is that Welsh Government have a long time ago adopted sustainable development as what they called their single central organising principle. So this was the planning principle that everything and all their decisions would rotate around. This was the core to their work. They're now seeking to take that beyond Welsh Government into all public service settings that they directly control. So we'll come on just to talk around membership in just a second. But the key parts to what they're calling the Wellbeing of Future Generations Bill are that they will set ambitious long-term goals to reflect the Wales that they want to see in the future. They will establish a Future Generations Commissioner in light of in the same ilk as the Children's Commissioner and the Older Persons Commissioner. And what they're looking to do is to integrate community planning at a local level with the well-being aspirations that they hold at a national level. So if you want to see a set of general goals, these are probably as general as they get. So these are the goals that the Welsh Government are proposing will be at the heart of that bill. A prosperous Wales, a resilient Wales, a healthier Wales, a more equal Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, and a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language. And they will look to see alignment to those goals in all of our local community plans. Given their generality, I suspect that's something which we should be able to demonstrate quite easily. But this will have a specific impact on local service boards. It will move the local service board away from guidance, the shared purpose, shared delivery I referred to earlier, onto a statutory legal footing. That will also go for the single integrated plan as well. So we will see the local service board become statutory, and it will be called the public service board in that area. They talk around this better alignment between national and local wellbeing goals. They talk about having that flexibility to have local priorities reflected, but this is, the last point is important for this morning's discussion. They also talk significantly around increasing local accountability and scrutiny. So this period of time we've had since 2012, where we've been looking to increase scrutiny's oversight, suddenly shifts up a gear, and there are very specific expectations set out in the bill as it stands currently. In terms of the Public Service Board, they also make specific recommendations about membership. This time, they have categorised membership of the PSB, as it will be in the future. So rather than being self-determined, there will be people who you have to have there. That who you have to have there is determined largely by those bodies which Welsh Government has control of in a devolved setting. So the statutory members will be local government, will be an Iron Bevan, will be a representative of the Welsh Minister, and they will be Natural Resources Wales. The second tier, which are invited participants, will be those agencies which are not devolved to Wales. So the Police and Crime Commissioner will sit in that invited participants tier. And then the other partners will be the people who locally you think will add value to your partnership. And that, for me, I think, enshrines in statute something which is, I'm not entirely sure whether it's a positive thing, because one of the things which we've really benefited from, and there was a question earlier about the contribution of Monmouthshire Housing, the contribution of both MHA and Melin has been exceptional to our local service board. And I think, you know, this sense of kind of other partners, and there is inevitably a sense of kind of statutory and invited and then others, a kind of a tiered relationship, I think kind of challenges some of that local accountability and local determination that we would wish to see. And I think that's just something which we'll just have to reflect on. But I would in no way expect to see people leave the PSB because of the changes to the statutory legislation. So just moving on, they talk a lot around how we make these assessments of local well-being. They want to use the information that we gather to inform national understanding, which I think is a really positive thing. So rather than this being purely top-down, there will be now an opportunity that the work we do locally to test and understand what it's like to live in Monmouthshire will soon be reflected back up into national planning expectations. And I think that is positive. At the heart of our single integrated plan at the moment, we have a sustainability goal. We have having sustainable and resilient communities. So for us, I don't think this is a very big step, but clearly economic, social and environmental well-being are fundamental to how we frame anything going forward. And lastly, and as you would expect, and as increasingly we have to demonstrate at all times, they're expecting to see evidence-based decisions in terms of the interventions and so on. And I hope that when you reflect back a little bit to my earlier commentary around what our priorities are, you can see that they are priorities because the evidence has drawn them out as being so. Just a little bit on the plan. There is specific timeline being developed for these now. It's expected that we will do another needs assessment in 2016, that will then lead to post local government elections 2017 a new single integrated plan or well-being plan being constructed. So there's this sense that as we go into a new administration, there will be a new well-being plan that aligns to the government's 6 well-being goals, and this will give a greater structure to planning and understanding of what's important within Wales. And I think that is a kind of a positive thing, and us knowing the expectation of when we should undertake those assessments is positive. I think what is really important for us, though, is that it is about recent knowledge and it's about us testing those statistics. I think there'll be lots of things which you've probably heard this morning that you want to go back and understand a bit more, that you'd like us to present on, because the nature of some of the kind of the nuances to statistics actually demonstrate a very different life in Monmouthshire, and I think that's really important. And then the final point on that slide, we will have to be much more explicit about the actions that we're going to take, when they're going to have an impact, and what we expect that impact to be. So we also have, within the Public Service Board aspects of the bill, very, very clear expectations around local accountability and scrutiny. In fact, I gave evidence to the Senedd Environment Committee last week, which is the committee charged with overseeing the bill. And one of the things which we were talking about was the requirement to report to you, most importantly, as select and scrutiny in our own local setting, but also an expectation that we report to Wales Audit Office, to the new Commissioner, and to Welsh Government. So when I talk about the resource that we have deployed to support partnership working in Monmouthshire, and then you hear about that level of expectation coming with a future bill, you can see that we need to think very clearly and very carefully about how we manage and brigade our resources to make sure that we're explicitly meeting those accountability and scrutiny requirements. But really, I do hope that following on from this kind of session, as a kind of a benchmarking session, we can really begin to pick and identify those key interventions that you will want to come back and hear around. Interestingly, we've got the bullet point there around consultation and engagement. The bill talks exclusively around consultation at the moment. Engagement, I think, will be something they seek to amend and add in. So consultation is writ large through the bill, but I think our sense of what early engagement can do is actually undermined and underplayed in the bill. So that's something which we will seek to build on further in the future. And of course, given where we are in terms of public service reform in Wales, it obviously allows for the ability to merge and collaborate across boundaries, and you would expect that. So that's a very, very quick run through this morning of how we use our local service board at the moment, what our single integrated plan says and what it prioritises. We've heard from some of the key partners. I'm really grateful for the time everyone's taken to come here to tell you about some of those key projects today. And then we've had a very brief kind of canter through what the future will look like in terms of how we as officers hold those partnerships to account, and hopefully how you begin to think about how you hold us to account and how we hold those interventions to account. I think through the conversations this morning, I think from just listening to your questions, there seems to be a significant interest around alcohol. There seems to be an interest around community coordination. I think I should probably rephrase that as an interest in understanding the impact of alcohol as opposed to it per se. Community coordination, and I think something perhaps more broadly around asset management as well, and how we think about that across the whole partnership. But myself, Nicola and Sharon will be happy to have conversations with any of the chairs of the select committees, obviously working with Hazel to determine when it's appropriate for certain things to come to select. But the other part of that is how we align that with the SIP performance group to make sure that as we're testing them, we know they're ready to come to you and give good account of what they're doing and how they're doing it. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I know it's been a very long session, but I'm very grateful for the time and the opportunity you've given us to set out what we're doing and how we'd like to do it in the future.
Thank you, Will. And before we go any further, can I thank you, Will, and those who've come with you. Chris, you've stayed to the bitter end. Thank you very much for, I think, a very, very detailed and helpful overview. Sometimes, I dare say, almost too detailed. But we've not done anything like this before. We are learning, and I think it's a very impressive performance, and you have carried us for 2.25 hours on your broad shoulders, and I think we recognise that and we're grateful for that. There are a number of things that we need to very quickly, I think, draw to a conclusion, but I have had at least one signal of a question or comment, and that's from Councillor Penny Jones, also from Councillor Maureen Powell. So I'll take, and Linda Guppy and John Prosser, I'll take certainly those four in order, and then we'll try and draw some conclusions. Hazel and I have been working on possible conclusions while this has been going on, and we'll come to those in a moment. Councillor Penny Jones.
Thank you, Will. That was very interesting and certainly given us food for thought for future scrutiny and, at Select CYP, especially for me. Very interesting, very informative. My concern, as I know others, concerns our accountability of the LSB and PSB itself. How do you feed back to us? How do we know what is going to go on? Are there going to be reports? Are you going to come? I know you mentioned the word scrutiny, local accountability, but is it going to be set in concrete? Are you going to come back, or how are you going to communicate with us?
I think that's a really important question. It was one of the questions that came up last week in the Senate, was because there seemed to be any number of, 3 to 1 kind of external reporting lines. I think one of the things which people had a genuine concern about was, did it move away from a local perspective? And I think at the LSB level now, we're going to have a session in January which will really fundamentally look back and reflect on the effectiveness of the LSB and how we position it going forward. And I think that communication and how we tie it back into bodies such as our council and such as the board of an Iron Bevan and so on will be fundamental to that. So I think that's a real key consideration for the local service board to have going forward, is how do we tie it back in a much more meaningful way to you? Because I think one of the risks might be in that the discussion that we've had this morning will be very positive, I have no doubt, about you identifying areas of specific concern you'd like to scrutinise. What I don't want to lose, and what I hope we've given you some sense of this morning, is the scale and the breadth of the activity that's happening. So I think there's work for us to do there in terms of how we do manage that communication.
I think we'll come back to that more than once. Councillor Maureen Powell.
Thank you very much. A theme going through all this morning has been the care and well-being of our people, be that the elderly, the disabled, and everybody. I don't know if the rest of you listen to the radio when you drive here in the morning, but I did this morning, and there was a question being asked. And you see, everything costs money. And the question was being asked to everybody to phone in, which is most important, to put money into the health board to cure the people who have got poorly, or to keep the money within the local councils where they can use the money to prevent ill health with all the things that they can provide. And I think that would make a marvellous debate at one time, because it is a worrying thing. We've only got so much money, and we do want to keep all these things going. And if the money's taken away from us, we can't.
Music to my ears. In England, public health, the leadership role is with local government, and it's not yet in Wales, but I'm sure things can evolve. Will?
I think that's a very fair comment, and I think that there is inherently a risk that as health maintain the financial challenges that they have, and as local government experiences many more severe challenges than we've experienced previously, I think there is always a risk that it's the early intervention and preventative spend that is targeted as the things which are relatively easy to stop. And I think that would be something which we really have to work hard against, to make sure that things such as the Joint Assessment Family Framework, which stop children escalating into child protection and neglect and so on, and in the same way, things like community coordination, which stop the escalation into needing acute care from our social services and health colleagues, are the types of things which we continue to maintain our investment in. And I think that's fundamental.
Councillor John Prosser.
Well, thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just going to state the obvious, really. I mean, the partnership working is the future, for all sorts of reasons, financially in particular. And I'm a bit concerned this morning because there's 13 councillors present and there are 30 absent. We need to get the message right across council, and that's the only concerns I have, and I'm sure officers and chairs will look at that aspect to see how we can improve in the future, because it's so important. And you know, 13 out of 43 is not good enough for this kind of topic, because it is the future, and we need to be sure that everyone's rowing in the same direction.
Thank you, John. I'm sure we're all going to echo that. Councillor Linda Guppy, and then David Dovey.
Yeah, Councillor Penny-Jones touched on the question I'm going to ask about feedback. But it's feedback to the councillors, but it's about feedback and communicating at a very basic level with the communities. I know you're talking about community coordinators, that they're asking about what the public want. But I think it needs to be of a broader scale about how our constituents, how are they communicated that this work is being done and how they can access the work. I don't think it's on our website. I don't think these minutes are open. And it's certainly through my term as a councillor, people don't know about the local service board, and they don't know about the vast work it does, and that gap certainly needs to be tightened up and reduced. And you indicated that you were going to look at feedback and communication, and I certainly think as members that we need to be able to look at that work, but also on a more important scale, that the public need to know that actually you exist and how they can access it, directly or indirectly.
I think that's an exceptionally fair point, and I think we need to work around one of the examples you gave, our web presence, to actually make sure people are aware of that, to make sure people know who is on the LSB, the types of organisations they represent, and the type of work we've prioritised and why we've done that. I'm very pleased to say that we have a new communications and engagement manager starting with us very shortly, and I think this type of kind of how the council reflects out into our communities and how we can best ensure that people are understanding what we're doing and taking the decisions we are will be kind of one of the first things that I ask Abby to look at.
Thank you for the question. And it's not just in this area, is it? We had an excellent, I'm just reminded of this, we had an excellent Supporting People roadshow in Chepstow the other week. I think there were similar ones in other places. And my observation was that at this stage, it was more about enabling the different supporting agencies to better network. It didn't seem to have come to the attention of many members of the community, but we can improve on that. But it's exactly the same issue. How do you know what's available and where to go? Anyway, I'm interrupting the opportunity now for Councillor David Dovey to ask a question or make a point, please.
Thank you, Chairman. At the end, Will, you finished up with the point that it was all about local accountability and scrutiny. I think we'd all agree that probably this whole process is only going to be as good as the weakest link. What I'd like to know is what happens when one of the partners within this link does not stand up. And is at the end of the day the Welsh Government the ultimate sanction on this? And what form would that take? And what would their attitude be likely to be if one of the bodies that doesn't stand up is, say, the police or indeed an Iron Bevan? And the other thing that concerns me is with all these activities going on, I know we're doing scrutiny and whatnot, can you clarify for me is how all these activities are going to be coordinated, orchestrated, make sure that they work well. I mean, we can scrutinize, we can suggest, but somebody's got to have their hands on the show and make sure it works. Those are the areas that really concern me.
Okay, in response to your first question around the strength of the weakest link and so on, clearly, as we move on to a statutory footing, there will be a different level of expectation in terms of the Welsh Government, how it expects, particularly those parts that it is responsible for in terms of devolved services, to engage with the public service boards. And I think that will probably strengthen that. I have to say that from a local perspective in Monmouthshire, we are very fortunate that we have tremendous commitment from our key people to actually work with the local service board. There are probably a couple of differing views around how LSBs should act and how the type of form they should take. There are some which are very, very heavy kind of program boards in terms of kind of very clear about what's coming to them, their expectations. They are there to manage progress and so on. There is equally, I think, as valid a view that it's actually about bringing very senior leaders together to understand the challenges in an area and to foster better working between them. And I think we're probably more towards that end of the spectrum than that very heavy program board mechanism. And I think that has had some advantages for us. So, for instance, when we had a very short timeline to change considerably the focus for the Vibrant and Viable Places bid that went in for Abergavenny, we were able to work with MHA exceptionally quickly to understand what was possible. They were already brought on board. They knew what the partnership approach should be. So I think it does help in that way. I think that point actually relates to your second question in terms of how do we ensure the coordination. We do have a wide range of partnerships. That list that I showed you in terms of the programme of work which is upcoming for the programme board for the SIP performance group is going to be fundamental. So it's about us making sure that our partners are taking a lead. So you'll have noticed on our priorities, the police are leading on alcohol, that we find the right people to lead, to take a leadership role and actually deliver. But your scrutiny, and particularly of the whole piece, and I'm not suggesting necessarily, Hazel will be pleased to hear that we kind of reconvene this type of meeting very frequently, but I think that we do need to have that oversight of the whole piece rather than just these kind of bespoke viewings of specific interventions. And I think if we can do that, you will get that assurance that the coordination is working effectively.
Thank you. David Dovey, you've had your question, haven't you? Who's next? David Hill, sorry.
I was just wondering briefly if you could say what your current expectations of local government reorganisation are.
I think that's an unfair question, but ask it anyway.
And I'll defer until council meets on the 22nd.
Councillor White.
No, I'm still offline, sorry. We had a presentation last week on engagement seminar. It was good, yes, and it was fine. In which, yes, the tutor was saying, don't rely on one system alone of communication. Your engagement, because I found this a very interesting and useful morning this morning. Thank you very much. The majority of the population of Monmouth, all these involvements will flow over the top of their heads. And you know what I'm going to say? I am an advocate for giving people information that they might pick up and look at. And what I always waft around is what I get delivered regularly, which is the Tor Fine Talks newspaper. The leader is only in there on one photograph. There's no other political reference, but the information that that contains, and which goes to every household in Tor Fine, numbers of them will bin it straight away. Others will look at it with great interest, others will just pick it up and think, oh yeah, they're doing that, are they? But it is such a useful way of communicating, which we ignore. We say everybody's going to go home, they're going to turn their computer on, Monmouth News, and it's not working. When I have professional people who say, I've sat all day in front of a computer, Val, I'm not turning that thing on again. So I really do appeal, let's start engaging properly. Let's give it a try again, not the rubbish we produced before, but let's have another look and consideration, Chairman. It would be money very well invested, in my estimation.
Thank you. I think we'll note that. Do you want to pick that up?
I can do, actually.
Okay.
I'm well aware of your views around the benefits of a community newspaper. Absolutely, and it's one of the things, when Abby arrives very shortly, she starts on the 4th of November, it's one of the things which we will look at very quickly after that. Some of you may have noticed that in terms of how we build our communications resource, at the moment Rob has moved on to a new opportunity in Public Health Wales. Jess is on maternity leave at the moment. So with Dowie, we've also brought in some shared working between us and Torvine. So you will notice both Lauren and Rodri in and around the organisation who are adding some extra capacity. And we'll look to extend that relationship with Torvine to see if there are things we can do to minimise the cost of something like a community paper and look if that's viable in the future. And that certainly is something which we will come back to you about.
Thank you, Will. I think it's, before everybody disappears, can I sum up, and this is absolutely urgent, and make some suggestions?
But before you finish and everybody just departs, I just went out very briefly to quieten a crowd outside the door, or several people, because I actually couldn't hear what Tracy Thomas was saying. So I wondered for other meetings if we could have a notice made which said meeting in progress, silence please. It was just, I thought it would be quite a good idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you make a note of that, perhaps, Richard? Yes. Well, now, I don't think we should go through all the things we've talked about blow by blow, and I don't think we should go through Will's original paper blow by blow, but there are some suggestions from, as it were, this table that I'd like to put to members to see what kind of support there might be for them. And I'm quite shamelessly incorporating Hazel's ideas into what I'm saying because we've managed to communicate during the meeting. Our first suggestion is that we actually take this morning's experience back to the next meeting of the Scrutiny Chairs Group, because there will be some, shall I say, demarcation lines that might need to be considered, and that would be the most appropriate forum, rather than have a sort of auction here. I think second point to make, and it's a fundamental one, because it's emerged in different ways during the morning, and we've all accepted that we're in an evolving situation. And I think it's true to say that there hasn't been a kind of formalised scrutiny process for the local service board, soon to mutate into the public service board. And why should there have been? But local scrutiny and accountability is absolutely fundamental. So we might as well gird our loins for that. And the suggestion from here is that we should establish, we'll call it, because it's the current term, an LSB scrutiny panel, which could consist of chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees, which would hold the LSB to account and work closely with the single integrated plan performance group. There would be a regular dialogue between those two. Have I got that right? So what you're doing, I think, you're linking member accountability and overview, locking into officer accountability and overview. For the bulk of the work and issues, we've got exactly the same interests anyway. So that, I think, would be something that we could consider working up. Will, like, perhaps you might want to make a response on that at some stage. And it could be we're talking about a quarterly event. We're doing the same sort of thing in principle to try and find a way of carrying safeguarding across the various areas of scrutiny. This, I think, would be different because it's a complex range of issues. But I think it would provide a vehicle for some of the points that have been made today to be addressed. And then we would want to propose, would we not, how the four committees, and it may be actually for the most part, I think it might be there might be an imbalance. I don't think it's going to be possible to divide all this up evenly between the four committees. There's an inbuilt bias towards strong communities, adults and children and young people, and I'm sure we'd all accept that. The suggestion is that the scrutiny committees would adopt themes from the single integrated plan rather than individual partners or individual activities, so that, you know, for example, the things that actually, it's not necessarily a very good example. Things that Julie started with probably would be best done, probably jointly actually, between adults and strong communities. Others would be more single committee focused. We could work through the list. Hazel, do you want to make some suggestions here?
I think our feeling was that if we divided the work streams by the SIP themes rather than allocating individual partners to each committee, it would be more manageable. We were thinking that the single integrated theme number 1, which was vulnerable people and access to services, that comprised 2 areas, which was community area coordination and the in one place that Chris has talked about. We felt that those could be looked at by strong communities and adults jointly. The single integrated theme number 2, which was about improving attainment, that was Tracy talking about the youth offer, and also partnership youth support services, and also there's links to Estin recovery. We thought that possibly those could be CYP with strong communities. And the third theme, which was anti-poverty, we felt that possibly rested with adults. Alcohol is theme 2. We felt maybe adults and strong communities. And then there was the Families First programme and various programmes that went underneath that. There was the Acorn project and so on. We felt maybe CYP and adults. And the JAF, which kind of links with that, the Joint Assessment Family Framework, the same, CYP and adults. But we weren't sure about work streams possibly for economy and development, but we know that they're very interested in being involved with this. So this is why we thought perhaps it might be best to discuss this at the next Scrutiny Chairs group. But I think it's worth us thinking about that some of these areas already fall under our existing committee remits. So this isn't a case of, oh, we're here today, we need to divide all the work of these partners amongst all our selects, because that wouldn't really be tangible. But some of these areas we already have responsibility for. It doesn't mean we have to regularly scrutinise them. It means we can pick and choose, but to home them somewhere where the responsibility would be sensible. It would give the local government scrutiny functions the responsibility of holding those partners to account should we feel we need to do so. In some instances, we might be quite happy with receiving their regular reports and we might not feel we want to look into it in depth. But I think it's fair to say under the new local government measure, well, it's 2011, it does place a responsibility on local government scrutiny to actually scrutinise the work of partners. So we've asked a few times this morning, where does that responsibility rest? Well, ultimately it rests with us. But the extent to which you go into detail in any of those areas depends on what your concerns are. You've got other areas to prioritise as well. So we felt that having perhaps an LSB scrutiny panel to oversee the work of the LSB, which Councillor Farley discussed, might be a way of taking it up to that top level so that we're not getting involved in the detail that should really be dealt with by the performance group, the SIP performance group. They're responsible for the delivery. We would just be responsible for making sure that that delivery happens. That's our suggestions.
Councillor Prosser, Councillor Dudley.
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. And I understand the psychology behind how we can sort of shape things up to various committees. I'm just thinking outside the box, so to speak, and I'm thinking to myself, Public Service Board going to be very important in the future. Perhaps would it be advisable to keep it simple and just say we will have a Public Service Board scrutiny committee, full stop, with people. What I'm concerned with is we have existing committees and we have great difficulty in getting full turnouts for those, don't we? And to add another bit in different forms, and I don't know what the answer is. I'm not saying we should do one or the other. I'm just putting another idea on the table where if we just had, and we've got to look at the Constitution as well and things like that, but if we said we had a Public Service Board scrutiny committee, for want of a better word, and those with with interests in those topics could attend those, you know. And that way you might get more people attending them. Very difficult thing to sort through. I think we could go to existing committees in the short term, perhaps, but look at a general model in the longer term. Yeah?
Thank you very much indeed for that. I think that's a very, very welcome suggestion. And I apologise for, at the same time, trying to consult sideways, because we need to make a proper response to that.
I think our suggestion was that given that the scrutiny committees already have the responsibility for a lot of the areas that we've discussed today, just demarcating boundaries really would be sensible. But the LSB scrutiny panel, I don't think we would envisage that would go into that level of detail, because it would really be for the single integrated plan performance group to go into that detail, to do the delivery side of it, and we would be envisaging it would be our responsibility as chairs and vice chairs of the scrutiny committees to oversee the accountability for the LSB, to effectively do, as Councillor Dovey mentioned, ensure that it's doing its job. I think that would be our role. And then if we felt that something required more in-depth scrutiny, then it would be for one of the scrutiny committees to pick up and run in more detail with. I think that was our sort of suggestion.
I don't think we can resolve it here now. There are other players and other fora that we have to bring into account. Coordinating board, for example, political leaders group and others. What I think we should do from here, if I could suggest, is to make sure that in Richard's capable hands, we've recorded a menu of things that we can go away and work on. And this may well certainly need a paper of some sort, so that we're not saying it'll be a committee, a new select committee, or anything of the sort. We're saying these are the things that we have talked about. There is an urgency to this, but it's not so urgent that we should tie ourselves to any fixed particular recommendation today. And I'm sure that is the spirit in which you would like me to respond. Would you not, Councillor Prosser, to you? David Dovey, I think you wanted to join in this as well.
A very quick one, Chairman. In another place where I have worked before and have some experience, we always put together alcohol and cigarettes or tobacco as an issue. And that is because they have the same impact on health. They're the generators of crime. There is incredible loss of revenue. There is no control over a lot of the sale of the stuff. The largest cigarette factory in the world is in China, and the only thing they produce is illicit forged tobacco packages. The white van man who brings his stuff in sells to our young people in the estates, or the people that are not as well off, even adults in the estates, and there's no control over what is actually in the tobacco when you put it in your mouth. I believe that to be equally as important an issue as alcohol, and it is pernicious amongst our young children. It's a really deadly thing, and it's a habit that they can do almost anywhere. They can have the fix in their pocket, if you like. It isn't like having to go and get a bottle. Your white van man will sell them anything. So I would like, I'm not saying you should, I wouldn't be that presumptuous, but I would like the committee to just dwell on the fact that tobacco is a huge issue within our community. Both the allowable and the well, if you like, contaminated that we have to deal with.
Thank you, and I'm sure Will take that back to the appropriate quarters, and we will note that, and we'll leave the sex, the drugs, and the rock and roll for another occasion. I'm conscious of the need to draw to a conclusion. You've been extraordinarily patient. I think we all noted comments by various members about the proportion of the council who came today, but we happy few, I think have had a very useful and productive morning, for which I thank everyone. I thank Will again, and through you, Will, can you thank those who came to speak, and to you, Chris? And as always, can we thank the Officer Support for the Committee, Hazel, who has worked on this programme in order to make it happen, and of course Richard for taking the notes. I'd also, with your agreement, like to take a couple of technical points out from the meeting to be referred to appropriate places. One, the simple one that the microphones are not all working at the moment, and the cameras aren't always tracking to the microphones. And secondly, and selfishly, but others in the same position as I've been this morning might also agree with this, I would like us to have some sort of a monitor here. It's actually very difficult to see detailed presentations from the dais. So if we could relay those two housekeeping suggestions as well.
Sorry to be a nuisance. Can I ask Will and anyone else that presents to us to remember the visually impaired? I couldn't read any, not just the size, but white on green does not do it for me. And it's cold.
This is the second time we've had the white and green issues. We need to think about that. And it is cold. People who've been going out, and Hazel has been out and got a coat, and others may well have done the same. It isn't, as we go into the winter, it's not very encouraging, is it? Somebody else wants the last word. Councillor Jones.
You forgot about housekeeping, about the notice as well, please.
Thank you so much for that. And could we have a nice notice to hang on the door to say, you know, we're in session. Thank you so much, everyone. For a number of you, I look forward to seeing you this afternoon. And to the very patient observers, thank you as well.
I said I'd walk around at 4.
No.
If there was anybody who was interested.
No.
What do
I
you
expect
make
there'll
of
be
it?
a number of people here.
What do you make of this morning? I thought it was quite useful.
Yes. Get to, for all to meet like this, very useful.
Yes. The attendance is